This special meeting of the Judson Board of Trustees is hereby called to order at 6 p.m. Thank you for taking time to join us this evening. In compliance with the State Government Code on Open Meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. We will establish a quorum. I will call roll call. Ms. Canoyer?
Present.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Present.
Ms. Faulkner?
Present.
Ms. Ryan?
Present.
Ms. Stanford?
Present.
Ms. Eaton?
Present.
And I, Jose Macias, am present. So we've now established a quorum, and we do have public comment. So, also, for the record, just would like to recognize Dr. Fields and your entire cabinet being here.
Thank you, sir. Good evening.
So we do have two comments today. Our first citizen to be heard is a Robert Korn. Oh, is that correct? Yes, sir. Oh, wonderful. Kuhn. Robert Kuhn. There you go. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? I hope.
Yes.
I'm Robert Kuhn. I'm the senior chaplain for the National School Chaplain Association. Thank you for allowing me to come and speak to you. We currently have chaplains in over 27,000 schools in 23 different nations. As the world's largest school chaplain provider, we offer trained and recognized by the U.S. Department of Defense and Department of Justice certified chaplains. We provide authorized certifications to qualified individuals who pass extensive international and domestic background checks, including a forensic social media review. Chaplains certified by the National School Chaplain Association have the highest level of accreditation recognized by the federal government in the state of Texas, which includes, again, DOD, Veterans Affairs, and Federal Bureau of Prisons. Chaplain training includes active shooter, personality threat assessment, and stop the bleed, critical life-saving first aid skills. Additionally, chaplains are trained in de-escalation techniques to alleviate frustration and tension by supporting teachers and helping improve overall student behaviors. The National School Chaplain Association is also on the Texas Controller Master Vendor List, qualifying us to provide chaplain training and certification to any school district in Texas. Responsibilities of school chaplains include prayer, counseling, and spiritual care. They provide advice on moral and spiritual issues, assist the school staff, and support student-led faith activities. Chaplains have no agenda other than to be present in relationships, care for individuals, and make sure everyone on campus is seen and has a voice and is heard. Their sole purpose is to teacher and students' well-being, not to proselytize or evangelize, as so many think. Providing services to over 23 million people gives us a massive database. Improving schools that employ chaplains show a drastic reduction in school violence, violence in the home, alcohol and drug consumption and abuse, and decreased bullying. Most impressive is that in the 13 years...
Mr. Kuhn, I'm so sorry to interrupt. You have 1 minute left.
Thank you. Most impressive, and that's all I need, sir. Thank you. Most impressive is in the last 13 years, not one school with a chaplain in 13 years has reported a suicide. Schools are safer with a campus chaplain. Schools have a 35% greater graduation rate among seniors. Teachers are leaving the profession they love in record numbers. Chaplains that stay on chaplains, they stay on the job. PTSD has become a real issue and sad reality for many of the teachers. We have all witnessed horrific acts in Texas schools, and chaplains are among the first to respond to provide spiritual care for staff, students, and their families. Why wait for another tragedy to happen? The best care for your teachers and students is hiring a school chaplain now. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
Thank you. Our next citizen will be talking on the chaplain issue. It's Rocky Mallory?
Yes, sir, Rocky Malloy.
Rocky Malloy. Please come up.
Thank you. I'm also honored to speak with you tonight. I'm the CEO and founder of the National School Chaplain Association. I was also the lead expert witness in Austin concerning this bill, SB 763. And what happened is over the last 30 years, there's been a significant amount of data collected from chaplains that we've placed in schools. State Board of Education took that data and they presented it to the Senate and the House, and they wrote a bill. We were involved with some of that, and the bill passed. As you know, Governor Abbott signed it, and now part of that bill is that you're required to vote. There has been some concern maybe this breaches the First Amendment clause, which, you know, there's 10,000 federal employees classified as chaplains. Texas has over 1,000 chaplains. Chaplains work in the DFW airport. There's 35 of them. They work in hospitals, first responders. And somehow or another, there's been a lot of bad information that chaplains somehow replace a school counselor. That's never been true. Counselors and chaplains offer very different services, but without spiritual care, your school cannot provide comprehensive mental health. And according to research by the U.S. Army, not providing spiritual care through chaplains actually creates mental illness. Now, Dr. Lisa Miller has provided a lot of research that the Army used in a program called Strategic Readiness Initiative, which literally changed the culture of the U.S. Army. Chaplains are deployed in greater numbers than they've ever been in the past. And they have a much more amplified role. And the Marines were quick to pick up on the difference. 1 minute, sir.
You have 45 seconds now.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, you know what? This is inevitable. Right now, there's 15 states with this legislation. I just came out of Austin. There's $500 million sitting on the table for fentanyl prevention education. It's going to be directed through chaplains. If you don't vote for chaplains, you miss it. So a lot of discussion about how bad this might be is completely voluntary, just like the military. I was a Merchant Marine commander, and I can tell you chaplain services were very important to our ship's company. If you have any questions after this meeting, I would love to answer those questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. That concludes our citizens to be heard. And if there's no objections, I'd like to just get the agenda item regarding B, discussion of SB 763, addressed from administration, and get some board input on that. It's discussion item number 3, letter B.
What is SB 763?
So go ahead, Dr. Fields.
Yes, sir. As you heard earlier, we put this on for just discussion. We can vote on the actual outcome later, but we wanted to recognize that SB 763 does authorize school districts to employ chaplains and accept chaplains as volunteers to provide support services and programs for students, staff, and families, while the districts can allow chaplains along with their other visitors or volunteers on campus. The Board of Trustees is to take a record vote by March 1st. And the different options that we can solicit when doing this resolution is option 1, use this option if the district will formally permit chaplains to serve these functions in the district and include adoption of specific standards. And then option 2 is use this option if the district already permits the services and supports of chaplains under existing policy. We do not have that. Option 3, we can use that will not permit chaplains to serve these functions in the district. And then option 4, we can use this option if we will not permit chaplains to serve these functions in the district at this time. I would tell you that we've read through this as a cabinet, and although collectively we feel like to have someone that we can refer oftentimes when there's a crisis in the district, people will ask, you know, for spiritual support. And we provide that. We connect them to we have people that we know in the community that we can connect them to as well. It would be beautiful to have someone close that we had a relationship with to be able to do that. I, too, am a firm believer in kind of a separation of church and state because I don't want to get into who comes in and who goes out. One of the things that I was made aware of yesterday is that of the DOD certification of chaplains. If we made a requirement in our policy where the chaplains have to be DOD certified, and those are the only people who come in, it then prevents people from just Googling, getting a chaplain certification, and then coming in, unreally scrutinized and providing any type of faith support or spiritual counseling during a time of crisis. So if that were the conclusion that there had to be some type of certification associated with it, I think collectively we as a cabinet would agree that that would be something that we could support, but we stand ready to answer any questions or solicit any concerns that the board may have.
And I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that we're transparent, obviously, with the community and get rid of any of these misconceptions regarding what it is. Obviously, it's not something we've brought up. It's something that's been passed from Austin for us to have some sort of direction on this. And so I put this on there just so we could have that discussion just briefly and think about it before we do have to actually tender a vote on the 15th about what we want to do. So I'll open the floor. Are there any comments or questions from anyone? Yes, Ms. Rodriguez.
So personally, I do not support having chaplains on our campus. I think it sets a precedent that we are favoring one religion over another, and we are a very diverse district. We have students who have many different beliefs, and I feel like, particularly the way this legislation was written, it provides preference for Christian or Catholic beliefs over our Muslim students, our Jewish students, whatever students practice, or our agnostic students. We have many students who don't practice any religion, and they would probably not feel comfortable going to a chaplain for guidance. And so I just think that I understand where this is coming from, and I don't support it.
Any other comments?
I have some.
Ms.
I
Stafford?
don't have a mic, though.
Right here.
So I've been researching this and looking into getting more information about it and speaking to as many constituents as possible. So I've spoken to mayors, city council people, parents, teachers, and voters. And from all those people I've spoken to so far, there's been less than 10% that are against it. Most are open to it as long as it's voluntary. There's no one forced to do it, and that's what keeps us from transgressing across church and state, is that it's voluntary. So no one has to utilize the service. It's there for those who want to. So I would hate to shut the door on a service that's free and open to those who are willing and want it, just in favor of those who might not want it. I feel like if we can offer something, and I know you're not planning to offer pay, so it's free. So it's a free resource that would be available to our students and teachers. So even Congress has a paid, they need more than one, I think. But anyway, the statistics have truly amazed me that 30 years worth of data gathering over, I thought it was like 30,000 schools or just under. There's been a 35% increase in graduation rates. There's been up to an 80% decrease in teen pregnancies. But the one that blew me away is that in the last 14 years, there's been 0 suicides in the schools that have been tracked that have had a chaplain. That's compelling to me. I haven't heard of any negative data with having a chaplain. So it's voluntary, and a chaplain is trained to service all religions pretty much, or no faith. So they don't push, and it's actually against their certification to proselytize in any way. So they cannot and do not proselytize. So I feel like if it's free and it's voluntary, why would we say no to students that would want to take advantage of it?
Ms. Knoyer, yes, ma'am.
So the gentleman who spoke referred to the Army and the Marines and all those, and those are referring to adults. What we're dealing with is students who may not have the ability to say, no, I'm not interested in this because of pressure that they feel around them. I absolutely have no problem with families seeking out pastoral care in some way, but it shouldn't be happening in our schools. I'm just not okay with it. I think that there is too much chance for discrimination, and the people who brought this legislation absolutely have an agenda, and I don't want that agenda in our schools.
Ms. Faulkner?
I agree so far with what I've heard on this side of the table, because to me, this is the opposite of diversity. I feel like it's going to cause peer pressure in ways we can't even fathom yet, because not everybody is represented by chaplains. And with that, I did call several constituents also and agencies as well that employ chaplains. And they are seen in the capacity in law enforcement, in military, as counselors. Well, if we put them in the place of our counselors, are we then removing the counselors? I think it's sending a mixed message, but at the same time, the word volunteer scares me, because then, if it's a volunteer on campus, how are we protecting FERPA of our students and privacy of our students, especially if it's something that requires, let's say, a CPS report or law enforcement. I have many concerns. I'm all for chaplains, but I think it's a family decision.
Well, I will appreciate the feedback on all of this. Like I said, this is not something that I stayed up late at night trying to figure out what to do. It has been somewhat manufactured. But I've always been open to helping our students, but as well as our teachers and our staff in any capacity that we could do that with. So I'm a little unclear, and I think that when we see clear policy that enables the option to go in or out, depending on the person's beliefs, that they can possibly exercise that extra support. I will say, too, that if we adopt the policy, and I haven't seen it yet, what we're going to do, we can set the criteria of what is appropriate or inappropriate, but I'm trying to diminish that this is a partisan issue or even, led by bad motives. I'm trying to look at the positive that we can glean out of this and see if it can help students and help teachers. And I'm quite sensitive to that. So I know that we have counselors, but our counselors tell us often they're overwhelmed. They don't have the ability to have one-on-one conversations. I know our teachers and staff are going to get counseling as well. So if there's an ability for us to incorporate this in a reasonable way, I'm open to looking at that. And so that's all we're going to do, is, if I understand it correct, Dr. Fields, we're going to enable administration to look at policies before we decide on what that policy is. I don't think the 15th, when we have our regular board meeting, we're saying we want them or not in terms of chaplains. We're just saying we're going to look at possibly adopting policy. Is that correct, or am I
That
wrong?
would be one of the options. That would be one of the options. The options are four. Option number one, formally permit the chaplains. Option number two, already permits, or option number 3, will not permit, or option number 4, will not permit at this time, and we'll look into it as we move forward.
And the last part of what I want to say is we need to also be very sensitive to what this may mean to other of our partners, as you mentioned, that are faith-based. You know, if we're sending a clear message that we do not want faith in our system in any way, shape, or form, then we look at our collaboration with Maranatha. We look at our collaboration with other church affinity groups that are affiliated to us. And then all of a sudden, are we saying clearly we don't want their support when we've actually used their support? And so that's where I want to make sure we don't throw it all out based on that, because I feel if there's a way for us to have that collaboration, it certainly would open the idea to having the option, I'm not saying the mandate, but the option for students, teachers, staff, maybe even community members to use a chaplain. And I'm also not saying I want to house them in our schools. That's not what I'm trying to say. Just the option of that being on the table as another. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Sure, Ms. Ryan, go ahead.
For the meeting on the 15th, I know I've tried to look up what some of the other school districts are doing. Would you mind having that on the 15th, just what our surrounding districts are doing? Not that that determines what we do, but
It's always a good-
I always keep a
Yeah.
lens on what our peers are doing also. So would you be able to have that for us on the 15th, do you think?
I can solicit as much as I can. I
As
know they have.
Anybody who has voted on it, they may not have voted
Some
yet.
people haven't. Some
Yeah.
people are doing it this month, the way that we are, so I will solicit.
I know Alamo Heights just passed it. And I also heard that about 56 of the districts so far that have voted on it in Texas have approved it. But I don't have all the specific names. I know Georgetown approved it, Round Rock approved it. So those are some that I know, yeah, I think that's what I heard. But that would be helpful. That would be interesting to know. I did have one other very interesting thing, because as I've been researching, I've been finding out interesting information. And I found out that teachers test as the same as first responders for PTSD, that they are considered to have the same kind of PTSD that first responders do, which was shocking to me. And that teachers are the only public employee that has a job determined to create PTSD that doesn't have access to spiritual care through chaplains in the workplace. I just thought that was an interesting piece of information. And of course, we can create this any way we want to. It can be more for teachers than students. But I'm listening more to my constituents really at the moment that feel they'd like to have it available, since it's voluntary.
Well, thank you. Ms. Rodriguez.
One is a comment in response to what you said, Mr. Macias. I think this resolution is very narrowly written around chaplains. It does not say anything about a policy that we're adopting as a district about whether we partner with faith-based entities. This is about having chaplains on campus to serve the mental health needs of students. So I think that, you know, we're not sending a message about what we think about faith in our district or anything like that. We're saying about this very narrow issue, this is what we believe by whatever we choose. The second thing I have to say is like a question about procedure. So there are 4 options on here, and I imagine that whatever motion language we put forward would be like, I move that we vote for option X. And so my question is, like, I would like to know going into the meeting, I don't need this answered right now, but going into the meeting, if like none of them passes, you know what I mean? If like we're in such disagreement about what should happen, if none of them does pass, then what happens in that case? Or do we just have to keep discussing until we can find something that everybody agrees on? And that might, I don't know, because I'm hearing lots of different opinions here. And I just want us to be prepared so that we can know how to proceed.
I can look into that. It says here that the board is supposed to submit a vote. And I would probably say that the lack of consensus would lead to either option 4, meaning we're not going to move forward at this time. And that should be agreeable to everybody. I mean, if we know that we're not going to move forward, then we say we're not going to move forward at this time. That doesn't completely alienate it, but it lets everyone know we're not going to move forward at this time. Or if the consensus is we will not permit chaplains to serve these functions in the district, that can be it as well. There are some recommendations that we put in the board notes as to some of the things that the chaplains could do on campus. I want to say, in closing on my part, I'm a spiritual person. I understand the power of prayer. I really do. And for anyone who were to approach me personally, I know exactly who to refer them to. I'll pray with them myself. And I can still pray for our district, even at a distance. I don't need someone to have to be at the school. I understand the reservation as well. This is the first I've seen in the history of my years in education where the state has said, you guys need to, so I understand the reservation. I really do. I will solicit from local districts and bring that back on the 15th, but I would hope that we would be able to come to either we're going to move forward or we just don't move forward at this time, or we don't move forward at all.
Ms. Eaton had a comment.
Yes,
Go ahead, Ms. Eaton.
Okay. I agree in part and in whole with everything, with some of the comments that my colleagues have made. I'm looking for a point of clarity.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to know what would a typical day be like for a chaplain? Would they be housed in our district? Would they be housed at the ERC? And if there's a problem at a school and a principal needs them, will they then go there? In which case, they're going to just be sitting here all day doing what? And, will students have the option, or parents rather, have the option of opting out of any program that we develop, and then we just stay with our school counselors? How closely will they be? I just have a plethora of questions, more so than anything. I don't have anything against the idea because, hey, much power, much prayer, much power, you know me. I move that way. That's my whole everything from the time my eyes open in the morning till they close at night. But where does that fit in the school? And my number one concern is always our students.
Yes.
How does that fit with our students? And
good point.
how do we cross that boundary of that spiritual anything, around their family?
Again, I know that this isn't something you can force on somebody. So we would have to determine all of that in the policy that we created, but that would dictate we plan to move forward, and then we would come back with a policy that speaks to that. Now, some of the recommendations was district must maintain on its website a roster of each chaplain to include the chaplains that we're endorsing. The district shall ensure the roster of chaplain reflects the religious diversities of the district. A chaplain is unable to support a specific need of a student, guardian, or employee because of the chaplain's religious beliefs, shall refer then the student, guardian, or parent to someone who can provide that. These are all things that we would take into consideration in putting together a policy as we move forward, if that's what the board voted to do. But at this point, we've been mandated by the state to take a vote to determine how we're going to go moving forward, which again, in my experience, this is the first that I've ever heard that we're telling you guys you have to do something.
How much time have they given us? I mean, I know.
Until March 1st, so we need to do it.
I know it was mentioned the latter part of the year,
Yes.
but it was just kind of thrown out there from the state, and it wasn't, with no guidance.
Yes, ma'am.
You know,
We could
so,
have brought it in December, we could have brought it
Right,
in
right.
January. We wanted to give it some time. We didn't want to just bring it up in the February board meeting, only because we didn't want to bring it up and then vote on it.
and have to vote on it, right?
Right, we wanted to put it on this agenda so we could have this open discussion and dialogue, and then bring it back in February, where then you would have enough time to consult with others and then be prepared to give a vote on it.
Okay, because, I mean, it's nothing that I want to totally shut down, but I want clarification, because I'm be honest with you, I'm very confused right now about what their function would be, because we have counselors.
Correct. And we would carve that out going forward. I think they'll be there for spiritual support. I'm not confident that every campus needs to have someone on the campus. It could be someone at central office. There's other functions that they could provide, but I do want to clear this up. As a former principal, and I have other principals around the table, and other educators around the table, this goes all the way down to a teacher. If a family comes in a crisis situation seeking some type of spiritual support, I've given those numbers before. I've directed them to those people before. No one will not get some sense of direction if we don't move forward with this.
What would they experience be too? I mean, you got a little first grader that's having a meltdown, and there's no counselor on that campus. We're gonna send a chaplain over there. What type of experience are they gonna have with a 5 or 6 year old child?
Again, I'm not confident that we collectively as a team, a cabinet, would recommend that. We would reserve this type of spiritual support for crisis situations, or for specifically for people who have opted in and solicited that type of support for themselves. But this isn't something where we would have just an issue on campus and say, you need to go speak to the chaplain. That's not going to happen, regardless of, at least that will not be our recommendation to the board, if that makes sense.
Well, I'd like to close this discussion up unless there's anything burning that needs to be stated at this moment. This was part of the rationale, was to have a little bit of discussion, clear up any concerns, and naturally have a better discussion at our regular board meeting. So thank you, Dr. Fields, thank you, colleagues, for your input on this for the time being. So now we're here for the main show, which is to discuss and review the proposed 2024 budget. Before we start the budget, I know that we're going to go into this, and at some point, we'll see where we are. We'll cut time. We don't want to be here till 10 or even 9, right? We want to make sure we look at preliminary information. But I did want to have us look at our calendars, because there's a couple of meetings that I wanted to get scheduled, and it's better to do this now while we're fresh and commit to it. And so the couple of meetings that I would like to look at is scheduling our program review and our board operating procedures meeting. I asked Betty Holmes to provide a list of all the meetings that we'll be looking to have that would also involve budget meetings as we go through. I also will look at including additional budget meetings if necessary, if by some means we're behind schedule. But in terms of throwing out just a first recommendation, I'm looking at doing a Friday. And I say that because, I'll tell you why. Because our staff does not want to really come on Saturdays, and board members may not want to come on Saturdays. So I'm looking at doing a Friday, maybe 3 to 5:30 or something, which still enables staff to go home and have a real weekend. So if we have to sacrifice coming in at a 3 to 5:30, I would be willing to do that. Mr. Rodriguez, I thought the same thing initially, Friday, but.
I plan every Friday.
Well, that's why we want to find 2. I just want to do 2 program reviews. If it is necessary, we'll do a third, but we need to at least put 2 on the calendar. And so I wanted to kind of put the 23rd of February as our first potential program review on a Friday. And I wanted to see if you can't do 3, it's 4 o'clock?
No, I can't do after 5.
Okay, you can't do after?
I work till 3 on Friday.
Okay, so that's problematic. So how about if we were to try that on like a Thursday, where we do a 3 o'clock, like on the 22nd? Still the same complication? Okay, I see. If we can't, I would say let's try at 3:30, 4 o'clock time, really, on a, so if we do a 3:30, is there any objection to that, Ms. Canoia, Ms. Rodriguez? Ms. Eaton? Yeah, the 22nd, which would be a Thursday, for, yeah, for our first program review. Okay. I will,
That's, did you say February the 22nd?
22, yes, sir.
I'm out.
You're out?
Yes, sir. I think I have, what do I have?
This is,
I've got, I think it's Holsworth, Teespra, First Time Academy. It's one of those. That's the week that I'm out. I apologize.
well, let me.
But I mean, you
But
know,
you're out that whole week then? So you're out the 20th, the 21st, 22nd?
the 20th and 21st, I'm here.
So
I'm out that, yes, First Time Superintendent's Academy.
how about the 20th, guys? It's
I
Tuesday.
apologize.
All right, then we will, you see why we got to do this in, because there's a lot of moving parts here. I'll tell you what, then, let's go ahead and look then one more date, the 16th, which is, well, we said no, never mind, on Fridays. No, okay, so I guess let's go ahead and pencil in a Saturday, guys. I tried, Dr. Fields. Oh, it's really not going to be any better? Well,
The one thing that helps during the week, I would just say this,
What is
is
that?
that we have all of the people who are going to be providing the program reviews here in district. And I'm not trying to steal you guys away from anything else, but that's a lot easier hurdle to jump than to have to give up a Saturday and come in on the Saturday. So,
yeah, because we'll be
But
in
we're
governance
there.
camp the week after, so I can't schedule
Got it.
anything that, unless we do Tuesday the 27th. So, okay. Well, this is a little bit more complicated. All right, let me just,
The 26th, Monday, the 26th.
Monday, the 26th
I'm in.
of February? They're throwing that out there?
I could not start until 4:30.
I am good to go.
4:30 it is,
Okay.
if everyone else is good.
Oh, wait, I know, I have to start at 5, because my meeting ends at 4:30, and it's somebody's performance review, so I need to like honor that time.
Oh, I thought we were so close.
Sorry.
Let's put a tentative 5 PM on the 26th.
Yes, sir.
And we'll see if we can do something else on that.
Well, while we're in the middle of this, could I ask, we are getting ready to come up on a bunch of meetings.
I know.
During this budget cycle. One of the things that we wanted to brief on was the 500 series audit.
Yes.
That should be ready by the 1st of March. We can do that in closed session on any of the pre-established meetings that we may have. But I can tell you for the month of March, we didn't set a budget meeting because you've got spring break and we didn't want to even touch, somebody trying to move
Well,
around during that month.
We'll do the 26th. Maybe we'll consider maybe adding that potentially if you want
Understood.
on the agenda for the 26th.
I can let that person know that that's the date they need to shoot for, and we'll make sure that she gets something that she can provide to you guys by the 26th.
And then obviously, do you want to schedule one more program review in March? My expectation was. For what? We'll talk about that. That's a possibility. I'm not saying for sure. But on the 8th, it's a Friday. Is that the same complication for the whole?
That's the Friday before.
Right.
Yeah, all right. Well, then scratch that out then. The 28th of March. It's a Thursday for the second and final program review. If we can do it early, I'm trying to get it done at 3 or 4 o'clock to start.
This work in the board community outreach committee move so we can do it on the 7th? I mean, because Thursdays generally work well for all 8 of us in general. And we don't need all 8 people, we don't have all 8 at the community outreach, is that? Somewhere, I mean, we've got like, program reviews are gonna be hours, like, there's a lot of departments. We're not gonna cram this into 2 two-hour sessions.
I'm looking for a 3-hour window on program reviews. We would typically do that on a Saturday. I'm just trying to move that during the week. So the 28th, if we can switch it to the 7th, I'll talk with the committee on the community outreach and see if we'll switch it to the 7th or the 28th. But the 28th seems to be what we'll try. And can I do 3 PM, or do I need to do 4?
I'm available.
Okay, so 3 PM on the 28th,
No, 3:30, she's at 3:30.
then 3:30. You-
Let's stick for 3:30.
Okay, let's just be consistent, 3:30 PM on the 28th. I thank you. As hard as this was, we're not going to even do board operating procedures one yet.
30
On the 28th of March. And then we'll come back and I'll try to figure a date for our board operating procedures meeting.
28th or the
Let's-
7th?
Let's go ahead and move forward, Dr. Fields. Let's go ahead and get to the budget. So we're going to, agenda item, discuss and review information on proposed 2024-2025 fiscal year budget. And obviously, just for the community's sake, this is our first out of about maybe 6 to 8 budget meetings that we're going to have. So keep it light, obviously not too heavy, because we have a lot to go through. And what I'd like to do is hear from my colleagues about what some of their budgetary concerns may be, or what their budgetary agenda may be for this year, some hopes and dreams in terms of this discussion. So I'll yield the floor to you, Dr. Fields.
Thank you so much. Ms. Davis went through and actually created a PowerPoint for us to go through. I don't want to step on her thunder here, but there's one thing that I really would like to articulate before she started. In speaking with Mr. Anderson and Amanda and Ms. Davis about how we wanted to present some of the money and percentages going forward, there were 2 ways. We could give you a percentage, and I hope this makes sense, and if it doesn't, please stop me so I can explain it better. We can give you a percentage of what it looks like for the budget, or we can give you a percentage of what it would look like for budget within, what's the best way to say it? Within the
Based on the
project,
money we
based on
bring
the
in.
revenue, based on the money we know we're going to bring in for that year. What we've been doing is giving you a percentage based on the budgeted amount, but if it's a deficit budget, we're giving you a percentage based on a budget where we know we're going to have to go into, quote unquote, our savings account to be able to pay our bills for the year. If we want to get back to a balanced budget, then I would rather them present the percentage based on what it would be for a balanced budget and not going into the savings, because we're gonna clear up some things about our fund balance going forward, about what we need to have in there, how much we truly have available, and how much of that excess we've been spending over the course of the years, and exactly how much we anticipate how long that will continue to last. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am?
I just want to play this back to make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're saying, like, on this sheet that shows the percentage spent on, this is like the January financial statements as of January 26th, no?
Not that one. If you were to open up your PowerPoint.
Okay, I needed examples.
No
Yes, thank
pressure.
you.
If you were to open up your PowerPoint
Yep,
to maybe, I think it's the 4th page, 5th page.
okay,
This one, where it says general fund expenditures
okay,
against the revenue received. Our budgeted amount for the year was like 258 million. The amount of revenue that we had projected coming in was more like was it 237 or 239?
237.
237.
okay,
But if we give you the percentage of 258, we know that comes with a $17 million deficit going into the fund balance.
okay,
But if we know we're only going to receive 237 million for the year based on our projections, it's better to give you that percentage.
Okay.
Because it's more accurate of where we should be. We can continue to give you 258, but then we're still taking money out of the fund balance every year and going into this negative budget. And we're trying to move away from that.
got it. So you're saying that, like, if we did that, we would likely see percentages like the one on here that says 105% that are
That's
like
exactly-
higher than 100. Like, if we're higher than 100%, that means we're running a deficit.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
thank
it
you.
exactly.
Okay, I just needed to like say that out loud.
That's why I
make
wanted
sure
to say it before she started, only
Yeah.
because I knew there may be some confusion as we went forward.
Okay.
Does that make sense to everybody? Ms. Ryan, I see you still got a confused look.
Well, except we use these percentages as benchmarks for how much we're spending in a category, you know?
Yes, ma'am.
How much money are we spending on instruct, and that's the way the first ratings go too. The first ratings are percentage, that one question is your 11 plus your 12 divided by your 20 and 30, whatever, you know what I mean? And that's based off expenditures to budget and all of that. That's not based off your revenue. So if we're trying to stay, you know, 60% of our expenditures are toward direct instruction, or 2.5% of our expenditures are going to general admin, if we have those goals, revenue kind of doesn't matter. It's still the percent of our expenses.
See, and I'd argue.
Until we get to a zero balanced budget, which,
That's why I'd argue it against that. I
that's what I'm
wouldn't
saying,
say
those percentages
revenues,
only work if you have a zero budget, all the percentages equal.
but we should be at a zero budget. We shouldn't be operating in a deficit budget.
I've only
So
ever seen one school district who has a zero, and I pulled 50 of them this week.
I
It's a
can tell
one.
you, up until
One.
about 3 or 4 years ago, we always ran in a balanced budget.
No, you didn't. I've got, yeah, I've got that data too.
I apologize, it goes
Yeah.
back to Dr. Mackey. But when Dr. Mackey was here, only towards the end, but we used to run on a balanced budget. And I had this conversation with Mr. Elizondo. But we never ran a budget where we were coming in saying we're going to go $25 million into fund balance. And that's where we're at now.
Well, and that's what
So-
every other district around us is. I mean, any ISD is sitting at a 58. Literally, Comal is the only one who does a zero balanced budget. Of the 30, 40, their one this year has a zero. They're one for one. I don't know if they have a new CFO there. This is the first year
They
I've
do
seen
have a
that
new
they,
CFO.
okay, well, their CFO is trying to guide them to a zero, but they are literally the only ones, and I pulled everybody's financial reports, that are doing a zero. Everybody else shows their deficit budget their reports look the same as ours.
I'm not
I don't
trying
know.
to say that we're going to be able to get back to a balanced budget.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is I want to report the percentages based on what it would be if we were just to use the revenue that we would have coming in. If you were to look at some of these percentages and do it based on our budgeted amount, then you're just going to see 100 and you're going to see these numbers like 60 and 50. It's going to look like every other budget. But when we know that we're running over in certain areas based on the revenues that we have coming in, i.e. salaries, that usually should come in at no more than 85% of your budget. We've been reporting that we're coming in at around 82 or 83, but if you look at the revenue that's coming in, we're at 87.4. And then if you count the ESSER positions that are being paid for out of another fund, we're at 90%. That's an area that we need to take a look at, but that doesn't come up until you look at it according to the amount of money that you're receiving versus the amount of money that you're spending.
And I will just echo too, I've been part of those budgets where, during my early time, where they were zero, to the best of our ability, right? But clearly, as Ms. Canoyer said, over the years,
Right.
it's transitioned where
But,
we haven't.
but to Ms. Canoyer's point, 2 million, 3
Yeah.
million, something
Yeah.
that we knew we would probably accumulate in interest or
And
something
we
like
weren't
that.
too worried about
But we're operating right now where we're going 17 million, 24, 25 million in a deficit budget. There's only so much savings and we're going to show you some stuff in the PowerPoint that will show exactly what that looks like, especially with ESSER coming to an end.
Well, and I will just add here too, that there are still some ongoing audits. One in particular, internal auditor, who stated that by March 1st, they will have viable information for us to review. By the way, just for the record too, they've been very complimentary of your staff. So Dr. Fields, they've been extremely pleased to work with them. They said that one of the best we've ever worked with. So that's very refreshing. But
Yes, sir.
having that data for March, again, this is our preliminary one.
Yes,
but
sir.
just know that there will be additional information for us to evaluate.
Yes, sir. And Ms. Ryan, as we go through, if those percentages throw you off, please just say so, and we can give it to you in accordance with
yeah, we can
the
plan it.
250.
Cool with that.
Right.
I'm cool with trying new things, so.
Got it. So, Ms. Davis?
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. Good evening, board members, board president, and Dr. Fields. Today, we are hosting our first budget workshop, which is going to focus mostly on the state of the district, financially speaking, for this current school year. We are showing you different kinds of slides than what you've seen before. And like Dr. Fields mentioned, we are going to show you some percentages. And our goal, of course, is to close that gap between our expenditures and our revenue. That's our goal, which is why we're choosing to show you some of our percentages in that manner. The very first slide, though, shows you our percentages based on expenditures. So you actually get to see it both ways. We're going to slice it and dice it in a variety of manners for your consumption today. So the second slide is the agenda for the budget workshops. You have the budget process timeline, which we will share with you, as well as sharing with you our current budgets for general fund, child nutrition fund, and INS fund, which is our debt service. We're going to focus most of the time, of course, talking about our general fund and our fund balance today. We're going to talk a little bit about enrollment trends towards the end, and we're going to share with you some of the budget challenges that we already know are coming our way, because there's going to be decisions that the board is going to have to make sooner than later. And we're going to talk about budget assumptions, not necessarily in this budget workshop, but as we go through any of our budget workshops, we're going to bring to you those numbers. And each time our numbers will change, because our goal is, as we get closer to the end of the year, we want to provide more accurate numbers. Revenue projections, short compensation plan discussion today, based on the recommendations that we expect to receive from the audit findings. And towards the end, we're going to ask for your feedback, as well as any questions and your considerations. If you go to the next slide, you will see the budget timeline. I'm not sure, is anybody clicking? Oh, thank you.
Sorry. My bad. That's what was up there before.
Oh, she's up there, she's following. Okay, so budget timeline, we really have only 4 budget workshops, but I wanted to show you additional components that go into the budget cycle. And that's part of training our principals and our directors on how to take a look at their budgets, how to basically put their monies in the right places in order to be ready to expend their money when they need to, and not necessarily have to wait for a budget amendment. But in total, you will have 4 budget workshops before the June 20th budget adoption hearing. So on this next slide, I will tell you that we just recently updated right before, so that slide is a little bit off. Everyone should have received a sheet of paper that states as of January 22nd. You normally see this during our board meetings, but keep in mind that our board meetings actually show you the funds that are 2 months behind. And so we wanted to talk about our current state, so we pulled this information from our Skyward as of January 22nd. And so this is more closely resembles where we are now with year-to-date expenditures, understanding that our total revenue in our budget was $239 million, and our expenditures exceed that. It was originally 253 when we adopted our budget, but you can see that it says 257 because if you recall back in December, the board voted for an amendment of $3.6 million to cover the state mandated program required cost at 55%. So that's why you see that at 257. If you look at the year-to-date spending, we're pretty much on par to where we should be at mid-year. You have a 47% on total expenditure and a 48% on revenues received.
Ms. Davis, Dr. Fields?
Yes.
Would you prefer that you finish the presentation before?
No,
or
please
ask or
stop us
take it-
as we go
because
through.
I will tell you, my recommendation is we stop. If
Oh,
we
yeah,
have
please
questions,
stop us,
because there's
stop
a
us.
lot of info, we got to remember
Yes, sir.
what we said. So if you're comfortable with that.
We are,
That's definitely
totally.
mine. So obviously, if you have questions, throw something, let me know, and I can stop the presentation, or we can ask.
Mid-sentence if necessary. We're
Ms.
good.
Ryan, did you have one already? We will yield you the floor, please.
Okay, so like some of this first budget session, you know, in my eyes is just showing the financial health of the district, just so everyone just has this very common understanding kind of where we are right now, before we start talking about anything that can even think about doing next year. Everybody's got to know where we are today, type thing. So, as I joked with Ms. Davis ahead of time when she handed me something that didn't say 47, I'm like, no, I like 47, because 47 is right where we were last year. So in terms of, because I pulled up last February's budget workshop, and about this far into the year, we're 47% expended. So I'm like, ooh, I like historical trends. So this is, good data to have, and since we're about 57% of the way through the fiscal year already, this makes me, very comfortable that we're similar to what we were last year. And, at this spend rate, we came in 26 million under the budget last year. So that's good. So, sitting at a $17 million budget deficit, I feel like we're in a very good place. Now, these budget numbers, I was looking back at my notes from
Do you mind if we give the same freedom?
Yes.
Like when you say something, can we?
Yes, I'll
Gotcha.
pause. That was my bullet point one.
And I would also just say, keep it relevant to what we're looking at as we go through, because I know that you reviewed the presentation, you're probably about 5 slides ahead or whatever.
No, it's the 47% right here.
Perfect.
Right.
All right.
I
That's
would
good
only say, to add to what Ms. Ryan just said, one of the things that we had last year that we're not going to have at the end of this year is ESSER funds. We will have run out of those. So the savings or the ability to move money and use money from somewhere else goes away. Even in our spring incentives, they'll be coming out of the fund balance because we won't have any ESSER funds left. So it'll be slightly different from what it was last year. But yes, ma'am, please proceed.
And then I looked back at how we came to these numbers last year. So it looks like this was on a projected enrollment of 24,698. And then later on, we have an ADA slide that shows we're actually only at 23,849. So it sounds like we have less students, right? Though, so less students is less teachers, less expenses, maybe to the tune of about 3.5%. Because I don't think we knew how many people were going to roll in for pre-K, and it ended up being a lot less, than we thought. So that's good in terms of, I think it looks like our expenses should be lower than, because we had projected a much higher enrollment number when we did our original budget planning last year. But that's where kind of that forecast column comes in to play really well, because we're starting and we're at our 17, and then, like last year we went from 29, and we just kept changing it every budget meeting. So as we refine our expenses with vacancies and enrollment and projected expenses, I like seeing what the original budget was, but it's also really nice to see a forecast of where we actually think we're going to end up. And, the goal is, what we say in May and June, when we get that financial audit then in November, like those two numbers being close means we were doing really good at our estimating, type thing. And that's what happened last year. We approved a budget, we said we were going to be about 4.5 deficit, and we were at 3.8. So I think we did a good job of refining that number a lot last year. So I think if we continue to refine this, that'll be helpful as we go through the process. That's all I had on this slide.
Yes, ma'am. We do have a slide that's going to come up and speak to that, but I would say that it's not uncommon for the entire state. I've heard from superintendents all day on this thing, because the ADA came out for this quarter, and a lot of districts are lower than what they projected. Enrollment is one thing. ADA is what you get paid for. Annual daily, average daily attendance. That's lower. And because that projected amount is lower, then our projected amount of our revenue may be slightly lower in the long run as well. Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. So then on the next slide, we do have the general fund expenditures against the revenue received. So this is similar to what you saw in the previous slide, except that it's just going to share the information in a different manner. So when we have our general fund, we break it into several different categories or object codes, and those categories are salaries and benefits. And so if we go through the first line across, just to take you through this slide, we take a look at last year's adopted budget of $216 million for salaries and benefits, and this year, for 23-24, the year we're currently on, We adopted 209 million, which is 87% when you're taking a look at the revenue that we receive. So we run about at 87% compared to the money that the district is expected to receive. Contracted services are any contracts where we work, for example, with our special ed. We use a lot of contracted services. In there, we have adopted a budget of 19 million. We're at 8.22%. Supplies and materials, we're at 6%. Other operating costs at 2.86%. Capital outlay is lower than 1%, as well as our local debt service. I think it's important to note that at one point in time, there was a specific, I think Dr. Fields actually already mentioned it, is to work towards that 85%. One of the things that we should also keep in mind is that currently we have about $7 million worth of positions in this district that are being supplanted with ESSER funds. We know that ESSER funds will go away at the end of this year, and so that's consideration for the board as to what are we going to do with those additional positions that were added 3 years ago, because we knew that we were going to have those funds. Some of those positions are going to be specifically mentioned, but we do know that we expanded our library program. We expanded also our, a few counselors in our bigger elementary campuses, as well as additional
Administrators.
as well as assistant principals in some of our larger campuses, and our pre-K teachers and our pre-K aides, because we did run a pre-K for all program, at least for a couple of years, out of those ESSER funds. So now those are things that we're going to be asking you to consider as we move along that budget process. Yes, ma'am.
Stanford, you have a
Yeah,
question?
just clarity on the ESSER funds. Did you say they're going to be done at the end of this year?
Yeah, officially September 1st, but we will use them all up by the end of this school year.
I'd like to jump in on
Go
that.
ahead, please do.
They'll be gone before then.
Yes,
Our spring incentives that we pay out when?
in May, at the end of the year.
In May, will not be able to be used by ESSER funds because the ESSER fund account will be empty, so we'll be using fund balance money, and we talked about that at the beginning of the budget cycle before we started the year. Correct, the general fund, the
Oh,
general.
yeah, we had that. That was COA 3
We
that we
talked about
approved.
that before,
General
but-
fund was
Right.
some of it, and certain ones were ESSER. Yeah, I've got those.
Right, but I don't want you to think that that account will be available for expenditures everything that that account can pay for has been encumbered, meaning that we've already got that money assigned somewhere, so there's no free money. That's a bad way to put it. There's no excess
Extra.
funds in ESSER anywhere. All of
Okay.
that is encumbered.
It's allocated.
It's allocated.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the spring incentives, part have been planned for out of the general fund and part out of ESSER? No?
Actually, the ones that we paid out in the fall, we used ESSER funds for, and the ones that will be paid out in the spring, about $7.5 million
All of
that
them?
will, yes, ma'am,
Okay.
yeah.
So 100% of the spring incentives will be paid out of general fund in the spring?
Don't want to be that absolute, Ms. Stanford. Trust me,
Or-
one of the things,
That's the plan.
that's the plan. But I can tell you that in an effort to be as efficient as possible, we are looking at all ways to be able to come back and maybe decrease the amount of money that we have to use from the general fund. So I don't want to be so absolute as to say, if money frees up in the ESSER account, that we wouldn't be using it towards those incentives if we were able to do so moving.
So spread the love where we
Yes.
can?
Right.
Okay.
If we can find other sources to where we lessen our impact always on our general fund and fund balance, that's what we're going to do.
That's a much better way to put it.
Was there another question, Ms. Ryan?
Well, yes, because All-Star's being paid out of ESSER also in spring. The $500 All-Star?
At the end of the,
whenever All-Star gets paid,
All-Star
sometime
will-
this spring?
Right, then.
Right after Start Test,
Before
right? It's like in
Before
April.
Start.
Thanks for sticking
Right.
around.
Yes, yes.
Okay, and that's coming out of ESSER, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right, just
That's
making
part
sure,
of the
before we say all
encumbrance of the
spring, we mean
allocation.
everything else is general fund. That's the only thing I was tracking that's still coming out of ESSER for an incentive.
Ms. Faulkner?
That's all right.
So just know that my background is city budgets,
Yes, ma'am.
line by line.
Yes, ma'am.
Department by, so can you, and it's an overlay of here's what it was, here's what it is, here's why, and here's where it needs. So I just have a question. That's a big increase in capital outlay. Can maybe y'all tell us what?
Copperfield, the transformer, the Copperfield transformer we brought to the board some time ago,
Okay,
and that was coming out of our local funds.
okay, all right. Just wondering.
Yes, ma'am.
So is that one item?
It was that one item that we can account for that huge of an expenditure. When we say the transformer, we're talking about one of those big things that buzzes to send all the power
They're
to the
always
campus.
expensive.
Yes, ma'am.
They're big and they
Yes,
buzz.
ma'am.
It was-
Any other questions before we move forward? Go ahead. Ms.
And
Davis.
then, so another way to look at it is, aside from what we just saw, is taking a look at the different functions that we see. And so this slide's going to be broken down a bit further. So we have our functional categories, which are instruction and instructional-related materials, which you'll see the breakdown in the future slides. You can see that a percent total of our 23-24 adopted budget, we're spending about 65% on instruction against the revenue that we received. And that would include spending on anything related to instruction, anything related to instructional materials, library media, as well as that instructional support team such as coordinators, curriculum, people, and things of that sort. Then you have the instructional and school leadership, functions 21 and 23, and it shows you the percentage that we have towards those expenses. This is the summary, and rather than spending time on this summary, I'd rather go into the next slide that breaks down each one of those categories that you see there. Instruction-related, school leadership, student support services, administrative support or general administration, non-student support, and intergovernmental charges. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. This is always a very important slide, I think. This is where you see on the left-hand corner functions 11, 12, and 13. And so this is what we call instruction.
Can I mention one thing?
Yes, please do.
Ms. Ryan sent us some feedback. One of them was, if you see 11, 12, and 13, before we used to just put the numbers, and we didn't put kind of definitions next to it, which makes it more difficult for you guys to get more abreast and learn what they are. So now what we've done is 11 definition of everything that's under there, 12 definition. And we try to do that all the way through with most of this, but it's all being done in an effort just to make it a little bit more simplistic for everybody who has to.
I like that.
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent.
Excellent suggestion,
thank
Ms.
you.
Ryan.
We may have plagiarized off some other districts, but they will remain nameless.
But actually, that is written in the fast rec, so it is the same regardless of the district. Function 11 goes specifically to teachers, always, no matter what district you're in, instructional assistants. So I think it's just important to note, at one point in time, the state of Texas did say you had to spend 65% on that. Sometime in the early 2000s, they came back and said it's no longer a requirement, but it's still a goal for most districts. We actually did take a look at ourselves compared to some of our nearby districts, and we're actually at a good percentage, 6.5.
63.6 now, but if you were to add the ESSER,
Correct. If you were
Positions
to
as
add
well,
the
we're at
ESSER
65.
positions in there, the reason that you see that percentage used is because, again, in trying to lessen the impact on our general fund, we pay some of our curriculum coordinators, for example, out of title funds. And we pay our librarians and our GT teachers out of ESSER funds. But if we were to include those in here, then you'd really see that we're spending more towards those types of positions. And regardless of these functions, regardless of,
Pointing it at-
regardless of those functions, what I was going to say is most of that money is in salaries. But you could also use it for resources when you see it broken down here.
Yeah,
So
and that's where I think with our benchmark peers around us, we are going to always, right now, we're going to be near the top of that because our salaries, it's all salaries, and our salaries are at the top of the pay scale, or, we're going to, hopefully going to be right there with them for there. So when we choose to be at the top in one thing, it means we got to go find efficiencies other places. So yeah, I think that's going to be the unwritten 65 rule. I think that's a good benchmark just to keep an eye on, even though it's not a requirement anymore, just to make sure our money's going, as much money as we can go to instruction and the people who are instructing kids. So, thank you.
yes, ma'am. And that's-
And I would add too, I'm always a big proponent of what the return on investment is. So if we're operating at a 65% or even 60, what is academic outcomes looking like? And if that means, do we need to look at increasing it to 70%? I mean, we obviously need to make some decisions if we do that, but just keeping a lens on that, it would be nice to see a parallel between increased percentages with better and stronger academic outcomes. I think that's how we all should do it, but just putting it out there that it's just important.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then if we go on to this next slide, we talk about these two functions, instructional leadership, which would be your special education campus coordinators, central office leadership, your curriculum team, special education, ROTC, bilingual. And then your school leadership would be your campus principals, assistant principals that are part of that. And you see the breakdown percentages. Again, going back, you see these breakdown percentages against the revenue that we receive. And so then another way to slice it, yes, ma'am.
On 23, I think we're just going to have to keep an eye on that next year because we've got maybe some people who were billed to LASSO grants that might be coming off of LASSO grant, principal and assistant principal and associate principal salaries that may be coming back to that number. We've
For
got
next
the
year.
ESSER
That is
AP
correct.
positions coming back. So like when I benchmarked that percent, I was happy for this year, that we were right in the mix. But if we start adding a bunch more salaries back into that,
I wouldn't say a
I'm a
bunch
little-
more, but even the converse principle
Yeah.
is going to be added to that, which is
Yeah.
now in ESSER.
yeah.
That's why we're saying there's so many positions that we try and use our categorical funds, and we used the best we could out of ESSER while we had it.
Yeah.
But that's coming to an end, and then there's going to have to be an adjustment, because we're going to have a principal for Converse
Yeah.
Elementary. So we're going to have to make some adjustments as we bring some of those back. But I would also say that for the LASSO grant,
T-class, it's actually T-class.
T-class.
And it's only two positions that we added at the administrative piece, and that would be in one coaching position.
no, I mean, for the LASSO grant, are we going to add those associate principals to the LASSO?
No, because those will be funded, yeah, no, her and I are trying, no, those will be funded out of LASSO, those new ones. We're talking about the ones that are coming off of LASSO.
Right.
Which is
Off
what?
of T-class, which is.
Or T-class, which is
yes.
what? Tanglewood and-
So Park Village
I'm sorry,
and
Park
Metzger
Village
Middle
and
School,
Metzger.
if you all recall, 3 years ago, received a grant for $750,000 to each school. Part of the way that they utilized that was to add an additional assistant principal focused solely on instruction. So you're talking about two positions there that we will have to consider either keeping or not, right? I mean,
Thank you,
when
Ms.
everybody comes on with those grants, they were aware that those grants were going to sunset for T-class
Yeah.
at the end of this year. So that's a decision that will be coming. LASSO is in the future, but to Dr. Field's point, those associate principals that the board approved last month will be coming, we will be, will be coming off our general fund and will be paid through the LASSO grant. Is everybody? Oh, okay, perfect.
Do you have a sense of where that number will go to, the 5.32? You said that will increase. Do you have a feel at the moment
So
where it might go?
for this board meeting, ma'am, we just wanted to focus specifically on where we're at, but I will tell you that for budget workshop number 2, we are going to have some forecasts. We will also be closer to the end of year, and as we start doing that, we have a better sense. We'll receive some revenue projections, we'll receive better ADA and enrollment. So we will have that for you on the budget workshop number 2. And so then the following is 31, 32, and 33. This is termed instructional support because these are all the types of positions that support our students. You have guidance and counseling and evaluation services that are used through our special education programs, our counselors. Function 32 focuses on social work services, our family specialists, our hearing officers, and then function 33 are your nurses, your health services that are provided to our students. And you see the percent of total that we spend there.
Yes, ma'am.
For 32. This may not be the time to ask the question, but why is there such a big difference there from last year?
Yes. If you recall, last year, there was,
Yeah, there was something with social workers not coded,
well,
right?
no, if you recall, last year, you guys asked us to go find money and
Excuse me, I'm sorry, could you talk to me, because I'm,
Yes, ma'am. Last year, we were charged with finding all of the money and reducing our deficit. And-
Grants. I'm sorry, go.
No, please.
We got grants.
Yes, but we also found monies that were available as we were finding where there was certain padding within the budget. That's something all CFOs do. And we reduced that projected deficit from 25 million, like you mentioned, down to,
I mean, that's awesome. I'm congratulations.
Well, what happens, we're trying to be transparent. Oftentimes in a budget, just like you would at your own house, you may put a little bit more in this particular area, knowing that you probably won't spend that much, but if something comes up somewhere else, you know where you can go pull it from.
Right.
This was that area previously.
Okay, had it.
So we took that money out of there, and we were told, down to the last nickel, we are going to make sure that we are using every amount of money that's in the budget. So that money was then removed from that area.
And put back in general fund.
Yeah, well, put back into dispersing in other areas. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
we found it in the cookie jar,
Yes.
basically.
What I would add to, for my own assessment and my colleagues, is that we're looking at 3-year trends. We typically see these budget meetings, and we're looking at, right now, where we're at, where we're going to go. But sometimes, the question could have popped up on what we do the last 2 years somewhere. So when we do the program review, having sort of a 3-year trend analysis would be helpful to see if we're trending in a certain direction and to have a real good discussion about things. But obviously, I think this is great. My concern to why I'm glad Ms. Eden asked this question is because we also need to realize sustainability. I mean, do we need to really be at the 3%? You clarified that maybe we don't, but there may be opportunity now to look at what additional support systems we can do for students and staff. But just to make a note, 3-year in some respects, I think is helpful for
Yes.
my assessment. Is there comment, question? No. Go ahead, Ms. Davis.
Okay, and so then the next chunk that you see are functions 34, 35, and 36. And so these are mostly your non-campus functions, which are school transportation, which includes bus drivers, routing specialists, bus mechanics, et cetera. Food services, having the district matching of food service grants. And then we have our extracurricular activities, which includes, of course, your high school athletic coordinators, athletic directors, stipends that we pay out for all of our athletic programs, music, and other extracurricular activities. So you see that percentage there. And then we have function 41, and that's everything pretty much having to do with general administration, central office, HR, all of the departments that you see mostly in the central office area. And to that, I will say that When compared to some of our nearby districts, we are, our ratio is pretty good. If you recall from our first rating, we had earned the maximum amount of points in that area. Currently, right now, with our budget where we're at, we're trending to be, it's called a cost administrative ratio, and so we're doing pretty good there at 6.5%, which would earn us all of the points in the first rating in that area as well.
Yes, ma'am.
This is the one fund line I know we've probably talked about the most over the last year or so, and this is one of the ones that has me the most concerned, because I went back and pulled 6 years of trend lines on this one, and this one's gone up 75%. Our enrollment hasn't gone up 75%, but this has gone up since the end of 2020. It's gone up, and this is all before you, so this is all historical stuff before
And
you
Ms.
got
Ryan, you're
here.
talking about number 41?
We're line 41, yes.
Okay.
So just the general admin, that's gone up a lot. And so with us being at, what'd you say we're at? We're down to 3, 4, 5. I pulled, and luckily, they sent us who our peer districts are from the staffing review, because they picked people who were similar in size to us. So I pulled those guys up, and they average out closer to about a 2.4. So NEISD's at 2.4, Comal's at 2.4, Grand Prairie's at 2.57, Midland at 1.87. So a number of other districts of similar size have quite a bit lower ratios. So when y'all are doing your staffing over the next 2 months of this, if we could just look hard at that category, because us going from a 3.45 down to a 2.4, like other districts our size are, that's $2 million right there. That's a 1% raise for staff. So, and that's true of every category. I know this is just the one that is very visible to be seen, that has gone up a lot in millions and millions of dollars. But as we work to get us, hopefully within some of our peer ratios, if we're going to be different, be deliberately different. So if we're doing something amazingly different that costs more money, that's great. But otherwise, hopefully we'll start to get ourselves, more right-sized in line with what other districts our size are doing.
And I wonder if part of that increase is because we've actually incorporated now internal audits under this. We didn't have an internal audit function for a while. It wouldn't be under personnel, which I think like Northeast has an internal audit department, which they put under personnel. So you have a reallocation of funding there. But we're contracting internal audit services because we can't find an employee to do internal audit. So I'm wondering if that also contributes to that percentage increase.
Yeah, no, that's the great level of detail, hopefully, because, just like all the departments are going to go through their stuff, I know the headquarters is going to go through their own. And then staffing audit's going to come out, and that's just, going to throw everything for a hullabaloo anyway. So all of this, I'm sure, will change a lot.
Where did you see the 75%?
I just went back to all 5 years of our financial reports and just pulled the ratios. Yeah, I just took actuals to overall expenses and just pulled the percentages and then just did math over time. We were down at 4.4 million, now we're up at 8.2, which is down from the 9 last year, so that's good. So we're going the right
8.2?
direction. 8.2?
I would say that
Yeah, 8.2.
8.2, in terms of percentages, I want to be clear. This is the first rating. And when they look at administrative costs, they say any district, and the highest you can receive in this area is 10 points. And this is where they think districts should be. Any districts below 8.55% receive 10 points. Districts above that, but below 11% receive 8 points. Then 13%, 6 points, 16%, 4 points, 18%, 2 points. We got 10 points. In addition, Northeast, when we watch their budget, is at 5.6%. We are currently at 6.25, 6.25%. So it's not like we're too much different from the surrounding districts. True, we've gone up, but in some of these areas, it's because we've created positions. Some recommended by the board, some we contracted and created an audit position, that $250,000 wasn't there before. So I just want to be clear in that
Sure.
it's not like we're out creating a bunch of new positions.
Understood.
It's because,
Ms. Canoyer had a comment. Ms.
yes,
Canoyer?
ma'am.
So one of the things that we did back when we were facing a really big deficit is that we took a whole lot of central office people and we moved them to campuses. So when you look at that 75% growth, that's just returning those people where we were running way too lean over here. So a lot of that came when we're moving them back, now that, because we were in a little bit better financial position. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind.
Oh, no, I'm sure we're never getting back down to 4.4 million. I know that's not gonna happen, otherwise we're just gonna have to shut down one of the buildings and send everybody home, type thing. So, yeah, no, as long as we can, stay in line with our peers. I know sometimes that first number is a little hinky, because in the denominator is your teacher salaries. So because our teacher salaries are so huge, it makes our number look really, really good too, because we got 170 million down in that denominator or whatever it is type thing too. So, yeah, this is the level of detail we're ready to nug down and get to this year. So, because
Yes.
like we said, this is the year of tough choices.
Yes, ma'am.
And we will expect to see some of that recommendation coming out of our staffing audit as well.
Go right ahead, Ms. Davis.
Oh, I had a comment.
Sorry, Ms.
Yes, ma'am.
Rodriguez. Go ahead.
I agree that this is a place where we should have an eye towards, being efficient.
Yes, ma'am.
But I wouldn't want anybody to hear that the board is recommending eliminating positions that people have seats in. If we were ever going to do that, it would be through attrition and reorganization of the work. And I just want to say that out loud. I know that's probably what you were assuming, but.
I am carefully not utilizing that word, because that's certainly not where we are, and I agree. Attrition would be a priority, but again, we have to look at the whole thing. We're just getting started.
This is the light meeting. It's
Yeah.
a simple introduction into
the
the
light,
budget
and we all-
process. So, you're right. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. All right, and so then we have, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my, did we already talk
Right
about
here.
functions 51, 50? Okay. All right, functions 51, 52, and 53, some of those still non-campus expenses. That would be your facility maintenance and operations, your custodial services, your facility maintenance, warehousing, security and monitoring. We have our police department there, and then our data processing services through our technology department. And then we continue breaking those down into functions 61, 71, and 81, which are our community services, those types of services that we provide to our students, partners in education, volunteer services. And then we have function 71, which is our debt services, our local tax notes, our leases. And then function 81, we have our facilities, acquisition, and construction that we have there. And
Now,
then,
Ms. Davis,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
sorry to interrupt you. Before you get too far ahead, on your 51, 52, 53, it did dawn on me that the administration has expressed challenges in filling positions like the police department, our transportation, and so forth. So when we do this next budget, are we just going to come to maybe another assessment on how to staff that? Or will you still be recommending that we staff what we haven't been able to staff for a long time? What's the idea, you think, in that respect? Because I'm trying to ensure that we create the best budget that's close to what we're actually going to operate on. Now, if we need more transportation personnel, we can always go into fund balance and still get it and still staff it. But we're trying to really create a real sense of what our budget is. So I just wanted to kind of get your assessment on that.
I think this is an opportunity for us to take a look at those historical trends. If we've always had vacancies to the tune of, 20 vacancies that have never been able to be filled in transportation over the last several years, then this is the opportunity to consider if we want to still include them or not.
I think that custodial department, we can say that currently we staff at one for every 22,000 square feet or something like that. We used to be staffed at one every 24,000. If we know that we don't have those individuals employed right now, and they're actually operating at 1 to 24, we could just change that, go back to 1 to 24 as a ratio, and then staff that way. But I think what we've done is we've gotten used to, this is how many bus drivers that they ask for. This is how many we give. To your point, if we can operate on less than that, it's always difficult to go back to any department and say, and I've been doing that since the beginning of the year. You can ask anyone around the table. Every time I get in front of a group of people, I say, we got to work smarter. We got to be leaner.
Well, Ms. Ryan last year brought up, we watched a little bit of Northeast ISD's meeting in terms of what actually is what we need to where we are budget. So maybe we can have some differential. I just think, and you know what I'm talking about, right, Ms. Ryan?
We know, we
know.
saw it as well.
We saw.
So that idea of really adopting a real operational budget and not incorporating all of these positions we know historically we've not been able to fill. With obviously a tendency, I could hear Ms. Eaton over here saying, nodding that we don't want to eliminate the option, but we always have fund balance to go in and continue, especially if we have an abundance of bus drivers that walk in and say, one day we want to work.
I can tell you that, I'm not going to name any districts, but if they run their budget with an anticipation of a certain percentage of people that they're not able to budget for, first of all, a lot of the districts that we're talking about are much bigger than us. So there's a lot more wiggle room to play with when you have this huge monstrosity that they're bigger than us. In addition, they don't get lean and say we're going to operate and know that we're going to have this many vacancies. They get lean and then try and operate as close to what they got lean to as possible. One of the other things that I brought up with the finance team is that one of the things that's unique to Judson is that we jumped in the middle of the DOI pool, meaning that we have positions filled right now that other districts, they don't have the ability to do that because they didn't open themselves up to dedicated, motivated, degreed individuals being in the classroom. You still got to be certified. So we were able to get a lot more closer to that 100% than a lot of other districts can. So we were able to see classroom sizes this year that we haven't seen in quite some time. So going forward, we're going to stick with DOI. It's just that as we take some of these positions away, when you're lean, you can't say, and I expect to lose people as well, or for positions to be vacant as well. Did that make sense?
Yes, so to your
Okay.
point, we have about 200 DOI teachers at least, and, when you take a midpoint type salary, that's about 15 million, right? That other districts aren't
They're
spending.
not spending.
So I just wanted to put a number to that.
Well, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so then we talked about community services. Yes, we did. The reason that you see the facilities acquisition and construction, the reason you see a number there, we mentioned earlier, was that Copperfield transformer. Normally, you wouldn't see anything there because we use our bond funds for that. And then finally, we have our functions that are in the 90s. It's our Juvenile Justice Alternative Program, and then our payments to the property tax appraisal services. Those, we don't get to control that amount right there. That's kind of set for us.
Well, before we move on from that, I want to speak about that a little bit as well. We staffed at 40,000, correct? Are we talking about the property tax deal?
No, she was
Okay,
just talking
gotcha.
about what we,
We have to pay them.
Oh, gotcha. I thought we were going to talk about what our assumptions were on the budget, because okay. Yes, ma'am, I apologize. We're
No.
coming to it.
That was painful yesterday. Painful.
Now, Dr. Fields, in regards to the facilities, number 81, where we had the unexpected expenditure, I think out of that discussion, we talked about forecasting the need for new equipment that are expensive so that we can actually put it in a future bond of some sort. We have a schedule. We know every 10 years they're going to go down. We should probably put a bond and float one out for infrastructure improvement. Is that still an ongoing thing? I know we mentioned
We
it.
do that frequently. I would tell you in this particular case, this was a blown transfer.
Sure.
And Copperfield is relatively one of our newer campuses. So there's no way we could have anticipated it. Oftentimes, emergencies just come up and we have to take care of it. This was one of those situations.
And so we're having that scheduled then with all of our facilities then? In
It's
terms of when we know?
difficult, if impossible, to schedule a blown transformer, and
Not that, we all know the life cycle of equipment in our facilities.
Yes, sir.
So are we forecasting to get a bond floated in the next 4 years? And when we do, that assessment is going to say we need new transformers
Yes.
at all of these schools because they're going to be reaching the life cycle coming to, because I don't want to use M&O money if we can use bond money for infrastructure improvements. So I just need to know if we have already, you're working on that potential forecast.
We are not only just for life cycle improvements, but for campuses as well. And that's what we're talking about in our growth and planning committees as we move forward. But we haven't gotten to the needs of the districts in terms of equipment, but we've already started talking about with our demographer on areas that we can see an increase in growth,
Yeah.
that we're going to need to see some relief in. Yes, ma'am?
Go ahead, Ms. Eaton.
Does, excuse me,
Yes, ma'am.
does our insurance cover anything, like the roofs, transform, equipment like that? Does our insurance cover any of that kind of
Yes,
stuff?
ma'am. But not unlike your house, when in a district, there's a deductible when it comes to insurance. And that is
There's a deductible at the house too.
that's why I said, not unlike your house, there's a deductible. The difference is the deductible at your house is typically like 3% of the value or 4% of the value of the home. Ours is millions. So once you get to that, then they kick in. And we went through that in 2016 during the hailstorm. There was quite a bit that we had to pay. Now, once they kicked in, they took care of a bunch, but we had to pay a certain amount before we got to that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then that moves us on to, that was the general fund, and we spent a lot of time on that because that's really our biggest fund that we focus on. Our child nutrition fund, we don't talk much about. There's certain rules from TDA, Texas Department of Agriculture. We had a total revenue, expected revenue of 20 million, but an expenditure of 24 million for this current year, and that's because they were asked to put down a spend plan. They're allowed to only keep about 3 months of operating costs there, and that's why you see that there for child nutrition. And then if you turn the page, we don't spend too much on INS, but we actually do throughout the board meetings. You've heard us talk about defeasance. You, as board members, adopted a board resolution. We will be defeasing later on this spring. You see here the revenue of 55 million and our debt service of 55 million. We paid 2 INS debt payments. We pay one in February, and Ms. Amanda Martinez just made that payment yesterday, I believe, to the tune of about $39.8 million down for principal and interest. And so you don't see that there because, again, we printed this out of our Skyward as of January 22nd, but we're informing you that that just occurred yesterday. And then,
Ms. Ryan? I'm sorry, Ms. Stanford.
yes, sir.
Just a quick question on the child nutrition.
Oh, yes.
So we have a negative there of 3.5 million?
Year to date? Yes,
Right.
ma'am.
So where would we pull that negative from?
They have a fund balance as well, but they're not allowed to keep so much excess, which is why TDA required them to put down that spend down plan. And they asked specifically for those greater expenditures so that they can lower their fund balance. It's a little bit
So it
different.
catches up at some point. We don't end up running a negative that we have to make up.
Well, I think what she's trying to articulate is analogy again. You're at your home and you have money in savings. You're only allowed to have $5,000 in savings. We've got $9,000 in savings. The state is telling us you need to spend $4,000. So that negative that you see there is the state saying you need to spend down. We give you federal funds, but we don't give you that money so you can put it in an account and collect interest on it. You got to keep that at no more than 5,000. You've got 9,000 in, go spend that $4,000.
Okay.
This is us spending that.
Spending that, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
I will say there was one year that we did have to kick some money in from general fund.
Exactly.
And that was during pandemic
Correct.
times, and everything was crazy, so,
We're just giving food out to.
yeah, we were feeding our people.
Which was a blessing.
Yes,
Yeah,
and they
I
needed
was
it.
happy for it.
And we still do that, actually. If you take a look at our monthly expenditures, no kid goes hungry. So we do pay that out of our general fund here in Judson ISD. Okay, so then we have our INS fund. We just finished talking about that. We do have 33 million in that fund balance as well. So then we go into our 2024 fund balance projection. And this is, now that we received our audit in December, we concluded that audit and we got our audit number of 123,744,000 as our ending fund balance as of last school year 22-23. But if you recall, throughout our budget workshops, we've always talked about the requirement to keep 3 months of operating expenses or cash flow, and for us, that's $63 million, right? So it's 123 million that we start out with, but we need to set aside that 63 million, leaving us down at 60 million of true fund balance.
Before we move on, I want to be clear about that 63 million. It's not that we can't go lower than that, but for a healthy fund balance, we need to be at that 63. I don't want to give the impression that it's assigned and we can't touch it, but a healthy fund balance, if anyone were to ask us, how are you guys doing financially, they would need to see that 3 months of operating costs, and for us, that's 63.
And it's part of our first rating as well. It is one of the criteria that can mark us down significantly.
Well, I don't know how you knew, Dr. Fields, but that was certainly going to be my question, so I'm glad you put that out there.
We can go
But I knew the
over that
answer,
if we
but
have
just for the sake of it. I think, Ms. Ryan, you had a question?
Well, yes, because millions matter type thing. So I think the guideline is more of your operating expenses, right? And the problem is this number looks like it's calculated off your budget, which we know is always a little bit inflated. So can we change that number to be 3 months of our last year's operating budget? Because again, if the wheels fall off the bus and we're tapping into that 63 million, like there's something else that's gone wrong. Because it's about a $2 million difference between using 3 months of budgeted and 3 months of our actual expenses off the last audit. And again, every $2 million is another 1% raise. So like that's how my brain types work. That seems like a more accurate number since that's not required by the state anyway. You know, this is our safety net type money that we have here.
No, not required, but we are judged by it.
Correct.
I would also say that, and basically what Ms. Ryan's saying is that,
Your mic is on.
oh, sorry, I apologize. Not required, but we are rated on it, evaluated on it. So I don't recommend that we go below it. In addition, what Ms. Ryan's saying is that if we know that we're going to operate with a certain amount of vacancies, can we not count them towards I don't recommend that either. We set these positions, and we have yet to go to our human resources department and say, stop.
Stop hiring.
Bingo. So if they keep going and they get to 100%, and now we're budgeting based on not getting there, we may find ourselves, it's just a bad, I'd rather us be higher, definitely. In addition, I would rather us be intentional about our budgeting practices and not cut down, just give the actual amount. And right now, that amount's 63. And I would not want to go below that based on what our budget is for the year, correct? Would you? And I don't think there's a CFO who would recommend that we would go lower than that.
No, if I could add a quick comment or two. I mean, he's exactly right. When you go out and sell bonds, the fund balance is obviously one of the things that the market analysts look at. So a healthy fund balance is a great way to keep your interest rate low when you pay bonds. The other thing is, you remember that a lot of your revenue for your general fund budget doesn't come until tax season. And so this truly is, a lot of people have started referring this to as cash flow instead of fund balance, because it truly does help bridge that gap at the start of the year until your tax revenue starts coming in.
So there may be times where you have to go in there and then put the money back. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, no, I think it's just as long as the board knows, we have, like, there's lots of fluffy money sitting there. Like, there's things would have to go horribly bad, and there's a lot more school districts who will be in way worse situation than us if all of a sudden nobody gets state funding, nobody gets any property taxes, and we got to pay payroll. That's really what that money is literally the world ends financially for every school district or something for our school district.
You're
Yeah,
absolutely
we
correct.
have that for emergency, and again, we have the highest per capita of anybody in our region, so as long as we know that that's a really nice chunk of money. And then whatever else we have on top of that, just good for situational awareness.
Ms. Wagner?
Just, that is a common practice for municipalities as well.
Yeah.
The 3 months operating, especially when you consider the services provided.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's not out of the norm for any budget.
Ms. Stanford?
Is there a difference, though? Are we graded differently on whether we have it at 3 months budgeted versus 3-month actual? Is there a different grading?
I believe in the first rating there's a certain amount that you have to keep. Am I,
Well, they just always use, I've always been told that 3 months, sorry, I've always been told it's 3 months of your actual expenditures, but it gets kind of a fine line in there. But, just as long as people out that are rating your bonds or rating your district when you go to sell bonds out in the market, as long as they can tie that to some 3 months benchmark, whether it's adopted or whether it's actual expenditures, they like to know that you're intentional about keeping that money in your fund balance.
So as long as we know, as a board, the difference between the two numbers, we know that's a possible place to go if we need to, and we're still meeting the requirements.
well, I'm just going to say this, having recently gone through a couple of interviews because we were trying to sell our bonds, that is the first thing they asked for, and that is the first thing they looked at. And then, yeah.
Extensively.
Extensively. And hearing you say, what is our plan for a future bond? If we touch this number, I think we're not putting ourselves in the best position. I do know, and also having felt the pressure that we felt in December, based on each one of those questions and indicators that we had to respond to in the first rating, that's the first thing they do talk about. Do you have those 3 months operating cash flow? And so I wouldn't recommend that would be something we touch. In fact, I would like for us to consider in the future committing that amount as a board.
Some districts have done that.
I think we already have.
No, we have not.
We have not?
But
We
our
have not.
I don't know
neighboring
why I know
districts
that.
always have their 3 months.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Just trying
Yes,
to
ma'am.
follow.
What it means is that, again, analogy, if you have a savings account, you can say that we're going to commit or assign the money to where it's obligated, you don't go touch it. And then unassigned means that's money that you can go touch. What Ms. Davis is saying, that some districts have even said, once they get to this amount, they assign it, and now they operate on the excess of what's already in there. They don't go lower than this. But we've not done that in Judson ISD in the past, and I didn't want to give the impression that we couldn't go below this. But to Ms. Davis's point, and to what Ms. Canoria was saying, I don't mind if we go below it, but by the end of the year, I'd love to be back at it. And if we can't find a functional way to be able to do that, then I'd ask that we.
But if there's no reason for us to go below it, why would we?
Well, because we're going to move ahead on this slide, but you're going to see that we're getting close in terms of what we have budgeted and
okay.
what we've been spending, and I just want us to be conscious
Oh, okay.
of where
Thank you,
we
sir.
actually are. Yes,
Yes, sir.
Ms. Stanford?
yes, ma'am.
But again, just for clarity, we're talking about two numbers here. One is the budgeted, 3 months budgeted versus 3-month actual.
Yes, ma'am.
So we are rated and graded on the actual, correct? No?
It's not exact, that's not.
They're just gonna
exact.
look
How
at-
the first rating goes, if you take too much out of your fund balance over the course of 2 or 3, our first rating doesn't say you have to have 63, and then you get 10 points, right? Oh, sorry. Like, the first rating isn't very specifically, you have to have 63, and if you don't, you get 9 points or 8 points or 7 points. That's not exactly how that works, right?
10 points is granted for having greater than 90 days. That is the criteria that I'm reading off of the first right now.
Greater
and
than
that's
90
days of
days
what?
of actual or
Budgeted
budget?
or actual?
Operating expenditures. Was the number of days of cash on hand and current investments in the general fund for the school district sufficient to cover operating expenditures? The district received 10 out of 10 points because we were granted for having greater than 90 days.
Excellent.
So that's one of 20. There's another one, and that's down here, did the school's district general fund revenues equal or exceed expenditures? If not, was the school. So you have two criteria that rate you on that. So I just do want to be clear that we were carefully looking at the first rating. We were being asked to make sure that we, met all of these criteria. And so I just want to share that that is part. Now, whether it's actual versus forecast, that might be a $2 million difference. But I think it's important that when we're talking about budgets, and David, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just did want to clarify that we are always projecting numbers. And sometimes in those projections, they're called projections, they're not accuracies, right? So there's always room for error, and we always want to err on the side of caution.
Yeah, I like having more money than less, but I do want to be clear on what the actual number is, what's needed, what's required there for the best grading versus what might be available. I don't like spending into the red. I'm not that kind of girl. But I just want to be clear, so we know what's actually required. Let's meet that requirement. That's all.
Yeah,
It sounds, I keep hearing the two different things.
It did say 90 days of operating expenditures, so that would be 90 days or 3 months of actual expenditures.
Of actual.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay.
And I just wanted to add, too, that I've been here a while, and we've always operated on that 90-day plan. I'll look back, I swear I thought we did it, but if Ms. Ryan does her research and we haven't, I just know that we've always done that since the first day I've been on this board. So let's continue to. But again, I just want to underscore the importance of unexpected expenditures, having plans for them, because some of these expenses are high, and we have to go into our fund balance.
Like transformers blowing up.
Yes, ma'am.
And of course, we've had other expenditures with athletics and so forth that was emergency. So anyway, go ahead, Ms. Davis.
Okay, so we were talking about those 3 months operating cash flow, and although in this district we haven't committed that amount, it is something that we might bring to you as a recommendation and a resolution to commit those 3 months of operating cash flow so that we can be like our nearby districts as well. And then, as you know, we have a projected deficit at the end of this year to be 17 million. It was 13 million when we adopted the budget, but again, that $3.6 million amendment that went through in December raised it to 17 million. And then we still have the spring incentives that we haven't paid out yet, and that is budgeted at a cost of 7.5 million. That's, of course, assuming that we've got all our filled positions. We're looking really more at about 6.4. So that at the,
Stop.
Go ahead, Ms. Ryan.
Okay, this is where you lost me on this slide, when I was looking at everything. So I don't understand why the 7.5's on here twice, because the 7.5 is already in the 17 million. Because when we approved the $13 million deficit budget, that already included the GF incentives that were on COA 3 that got passed in May. So why is the 7,500 on there twice then?
actually, if you go back to the June,
Yep,
to
I
the
also
June
have what we
adoption
approved
hearing.
that day. Well, I have what we approved on June 22nd.
I was just under the impression that we approved it without that 7.5 until a later date. And then we passed
exactly what
sometime in the fall, I can't remember, but you had explicitly stated back then, we're not going to include this in our budget,
That's
but we
exactly
will bring it back. But there was a commitment from this board to support those incentives and to ensure we had it. That was my understanding. I
That
don't know.
is, if you go back to the video and if you go back to that slide, that is exactly what.
So I did watch all the videos, and I did go back to all the slides. It says, literally,
spring incent on every single slide, and I went through all 5 budget workshops and board meetings, every single place you continue to, it said in here that the all spring incentives are included in this budget. Like, it says that. And then when I look at what we approved on June 22nd, there's a fund balance thing at the bottom of it, and you got the 4.53 and you got the 13, which is what we were at when we approved it. There's no 7.5 on here, and this is what we approved on June 22nd in the board meeting. So why, if we had already, because I knew we had to pass a resolution for ESSER, so I think you're mixing up the 7 million, or the fall incentives. We had to pass a resolution in order to give the fall incentives out of ESSER, and we did pass that. So that's what I think you're thinking of. But every slide in the May and June things said incentives are in this budget amount. So I guess I guess what I'm getting at is, are you telling me there's a $7.5 million budget amendment coming our way for another $7.5 million? Because I'm confused on how we approved it, and it's not in the budget.
It is, I could probably go up there and show you the slide where that is stated.
Now, if this can be timely, we can come back to it knowing that this point has been made so we can get clarity. If I am mistaken on that,
Is it in there?
you can clarify that for the
Where's
board. Do you have it right there?
Right
Yes.
here.
How does it affect the fund balance? Where's it at, Amanda? There it is, spring and stipend, 7.5 million.
So if you add, you
Yeah,
have to add.
and here I have on our thing, 2024 proposed budget includes, for option 2 and 3, includes spring incentives. All of this is included when we voted on COA 3. It was already in here.
So if
So
we're looking
How
at
was it
slide
not?
15 from the budget workshop in June 20th of 20.
June 20th, slide 15.
So
Mine are
is it
numbered
in there or
differently.
not?
We've been saying this for quite some time, that we were going to have to take the second portion of the incentives out of the fund balance, and it was not included in the original
So
deficit.
is that what's on this slide?
Is that what's on the side? That we were going to include the spring incentive out of the fund balance, and it was not included in the original deficit?
It doesn't say that. It just says, well, yeah, it says 2024 spring stipends, and it's right above the 13.4 deficit. So
Is there a pay- is there a pay-
So you add that to the 7.
And then
There a pay-
7.5, so it wasn't added to the
That's not in here.
17, because if you had 13, you add the 3.6, and we keep, then that brings you to the 17. The 7.5 was on top of that, correct?
That is correct. The way it was
So-
written there, that was our understanding.
But if there was
Sure.
confusion about that,
Yeah.
an email
Well, I guess I'm
would have
just
been
confused,
nice,
so we're
and
now
then we
running
would
a
have sent that
$24
to
million
you.
budget deficit, not 17?
An email would have been nice, and we would have sent that to you, but as we just said, it says 3 point whatever on the deficit, plus the extra 3.6 that we added later, and then this 7.5 is on top. But if there was confusion, let us know, and we'll get that information to you ahead of time.
And still, it looks, just for the sake of all of us being on the same page, we get that clarity. You can still send a communication to us, make sure, and just obviously if,
Will do.
yeah, just, we're going to talk about this again. Obviously, we still have more discussion on
We
it.
have a budget amendment we have to add before we can pay spring incentives.
Absolutely.
That's a little scary, because they think they're getting their
No,
incentives.
they will. This board already committed to it. So the bottom line is, if there is an error, we will continue and obligate that commitment. But if you could confirm that, that way we can move on this part. We've made note.
Yes, sir.
There's a need for clarity on this.
There's, we're
And-
fine.
and
And then,
just-
but this is all to show.
Sure.
That on the first one, it was 6.4 million. So that 7.5 may be slightly lower than that, because what we paid out on the fall was 6.4, so it may be 6.4 on the spring. But that would leave us at 35 million
And
of this unassigned or non-63. Then if you go into what's projected for next year, without making any changes, you see the 17, now it would be doubled at 15, 7.5, 7.5. And then the ESSER created positions of 7 million, which then brings us down to 4.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think I get the sense of where Ms. Ryan and maybe my colleagues, we want to just make sure we know exactly what we have, because we have such a small amount to work with this year. We're in a different world than where we were the last 2 years in terms of budget, and so we're going to have to be really critical about our strategy and our implementation of this. I also want to say that I'm trying to end our meeting at 8:30. I mean, unless everyone twists my arm, they want to be
We should
longer.
be done.
But just wanted to
Yes,
give
sir.
you and my colleagues this idea where we'd like to
Yes.
end
Got it.
tonight. Go ahead. Ms. Ryan?
Also, I don't see on that fund balance our investment income. We should probably be projecting that also, at least for this year. We're most of the way through the year, so we got a pretty good idea what our investment income that's going to go back into.
We don't
fund
typically
reserve.
add unallocated
We don't add it into the
interest
budget, but
into
in
the
our budget cycle, we add it in, because it will be a factor. Oh, we don't, okay. Well, anyway, the rate of return on tax pool has been over 5% every month, so it looks like based on our fund balance that we have, we are gonna have over $6 million in interest, just this fiscal year, so I think that's very important for the board to know, because that's a 3% pay raise we're making just in interest. So just more,
If
everybody
the
just
board
needs
is willing to
understand-
come back, and I can tell you
The
in years
financial.
past, we've never gone to our tax pool and said, this is how much we've got in unallocated interest, and now we're going to give a raise based on that.
Because those rates can change.
Because those rates can change. Because all of that is
No,
based
that's
on.
not what I'm saying. We reinvest our investment funds, so our fund balance goes up at all times, because every quarter it just gets reinvested back in. So that's more money we have in the bank, like my savings account, like if I roll over a CD or something,
The maturity.
right? We don't budget for it at the beginning of the year because we don't know what interest rates are going to do in 24, 25. But when you're going through your planning process, you just acknowledge that we're on track to make about 5 or 6 million, and everything's an estimate anyway. None of all these numbers are just very fluffy. So I just don't want us, because we're going to talk later about a $40,000 expense, I don't want us to skip over a $6 million revenue and spend more time talking about a $36,000 expense. I just want to make sure we keep our eyes on the really big numbers, that are going to affect our financial health. So no,
Well,
I'm
and
not saying add it to the budget, actual budget line.
But what I'm saying is that I want to be clear about what we're saying. If you have funds that are not consistent, and then you start allocating that into salaries, we're talking about people's salaries, that's recurring. That's not going to go away, and it's not based on how well you do in terms of your investments. So we're very careful about how we expend those funds. We do that based on our projected return on revenues of our ADA, of our taxes that we receive. All of that is calculated, not based.
Stable income.
It's stable income, not something that, now we could take that and maybe give it out in an incentive if you wanted to, but then you have to know how much you have. But to say that, well, we've been getting this and we need to incorporate that into salaries is just, that's not a way that I think we should operate our funds.
Yeah, no, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. This slide very specifically looks at what the health of our fund balance is going to be, just to give us, we're not saying we're spending that money, we're not putting it in the budget, but I think the board needs to understand that on top of these one-time expenses you've put on here, there's gonna be another $5 or $6 million that by the time we pass the budget in June.
There's not gonna be, there should be.
Correct, yes, and we're in February already,
Right,
so
right,
we
right,
know.
right.
Yeah, we're in 9
But
months
the
into it.
message we're trying to
We
send
can make a good
is,
estimate.
you can see a decrease in what essentially came across as $123 million of fund balance, now at the end, coming back down to maybe about $5 million.
Well, but I also think you haven't put the forecast on here either, and we've been off somewhere between 26 and 39 million always on our budget every year. So.
I love you brought that up.
Do you really think we're going to be $17 million in deficit at the end of this year?
I think we're going to be closer to that than we have been in the past, and let me explain why. Over the last 3 years, you've had what everybody's referring to as ESSER. And oftentimes, a lot of the salaries and other expenses that we were doing, we were able to take out of that amount of money. I thought I've been pretty clear. ESSER's gone.
Going away.
No, correct,
When
and I
we
even
pay
went
out
back
the
and
spring
compared.
incentives, there'll be no more ESSER left that's not encumbered already. So and if you look, if you could go to the next slide, please. If you look at the last 3 years, 2021 doesn't really count because that was the pandemic and everything was a whack. We were receiving funds and a lot of students weren't here. But over those last 2 years, you see that elevated lift in terms of our fund balance, and that comes from what was infused from the ESSER funds. We received, what was it, 40 million
Yeah, 43.6 in ESSER 3.
last year. That won't be here next year. That's a considerable amount of money to have to budget for going into the next year.
But is she saying that the interest income could offset the?
No, she's just saying that we need to
the
account for the
deficit,
interest
offset-
income.
Offset the deficit, not give us money to
Offset the
spend.
deficit, yes.
$43 million.
No, no.
We're talking
We didn't
about
spend
5.
43 million last year on ESSER.
That it would,
I'm sorry?
We only spent 18 million on ESSER, just to be clear.
I'm
Last year, we
saying,
spent
what-
18 million of ESSER 2 and 3
Over the 3
combined.
years, it was 40?
So our ESSER
I have all
3
that.
that we received is 43 million. Over the 3, ESSER 1, 2, and 3, it's 67.2
okay,
million.
but is the point that if we add in
So
the
last year,
interest
43 million.
income,
No, last year was 18 in the financial report.
19
How much you spent? I'm sorry, you spent 18 million of ESSER 1, 2, and 3 last year.
But ma'am, regardless of how much we spend, we will be spending all of ESSER before the end of this year. There won't be any more. And we've taken on as a district a lot of positions. To the point that you guys made earlier, you've seen the number of positions, you've seen the increase in salaries. And that is because we've taken on, the board has approved additional positions to this district that we will no longer have a way to solvent those positions moving.
I believe Ms. Stanford still has the floor. Go ahead and finish your
Yes,
yeah,
question.
am I
sorry.
saying, does the interest income offset the deficit, the bottom line deficit? Or is it an invisible number we don't want to,
It's an invisible number we don't want.
that we don't want to credit to anything?
We can bring it out and use it if we need to.
I'm not saying use it. I'm saying apply it to offset a deficit number, not spend it. Don't put it in our spending account, but acknowledge it.
It's
We don't know what
acknowledged.
it's gonna be. It's kind of hard to acknowledge something you don't know what it is.
Hold on, Ms. Stanford has the floor.
Right, whenever we get it, we aren't going to just tuck it away and ignore it.
Not at all, not at all.
Will it be applied against the deficit?
Eventually, yes, when it's time to apply it because we need to, but oftentimes when we receive an interest increase, just like in the bond, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we get a bond, we put that money into an investment account as well, and we have unallocated interest associated. And then when other projects show up that weren't a part of it, we go into those funds and then use that money when we need it. But do we just, as soon as it comes in, take it and put it into one of the other budgeted amounts so they can use it? No, ma'am, we just
No.
let it accumulate.
No, I agree.
I think Ms. Rodriguez had something to contribute to this. Ms. Rodriguez?
I was just going to say that I personally, like, Ms. Ryan, I appreciate you asking the questions and things, but you've also said, I hope the board understands. I personally understand, and I'm ready to move on. And so, like, I think this is something that we can continue talking about, but for tonight, I'm ready to move on. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I wanted to throw that out there.
Because I fully understand. Jesus.
I do want to say
8:30.
this before we move on. I want to say this before we move. I don't want this to be a back and forth gotcha thing. I truly want us to be able to articulate exactly what we're thinking and how we're thinking it. And if you have concerns, send those concerns to us. I don't want the meetings to turn into a point where we try and surprise. There should be no surprises. We should be able to cover any concerns prior to the meeting and get that to all of you.
And that's the strength of this, right? This is our preliminary. I'm going to just tell you right now, this is more than we've ever seen in a preliminary budget workshop, and I appreciate that due
appreciate that,
diligence.
Mr.
But naturally, I don't expect us to have all the answers. Give us the information. We're going to think through it. We're going to go forward on it. The points that are being brought up, now you can bring clarity, because I'll tell you, this board, we all have friends. So if we're not clear, we're telling unclear things to all kinds of people, and we need to be very clear.
Understood.
So please proceed.
We can go to the next slide. Enrollment and ADA trends.
So as you know, we do use our enrollment but particularly our ADA to calculate some of those projected revenue. We also work with our demographer to calculate some of that in future enrollment trend. And we also work with Mo Casey to be able to provide those projections, as well as the property value study that we receive from our comptrollers. And so right now, we haven't brought to you those projections, but it's actually something that has been very recently released. We will be sharing that with you shortly, but we did want to share some of those enrollment and ADA trends that you've seen. You saw the spike in 22-23. We did see a decrease, a slight decrease in enrollment and as well as our ADA. So that will, of course, impact the revenue that we receive.
Go ahead, Ms. Ryan.
So the spike was mostly pre-K, because we had a lot, and out of district, because we had a lot of people here we weren't ever going to get paid for, even if they showed up, because they're not fundable by the state. So I think most school boards would freak out if they saw a big decrease, but we're not freaking out about that, because we know 1,500 unpaid pre-K kids left. So that's a good thing that it went down. But I don't understand why we're projecting our ADA to be so much lower. I mean, our taper was over 90 last year, and we have gotten grants and hired truancy officers, and we have done so much to get our ADA up. Do we truly think we're never going to get above 90? Because I guess, like, what's the return on investment if we're spending so much money on truancy, even if it's grants? How are our truancy numbers not going up at all? Because it feels like this number should be higher than 88. It was higher than that last year. It was 90.2 on the taper. So why are we projecting next year we're actually going to do worse, I guess?
I would say that across the state, ADA has gone down. I would also say that I too looked into this to say, hey, why are our numbers, even enrollment, why are we going down? But one of the things, we did two things last year. We changed our pre-K, which equated to about 1,200, almost 1,300. We also changed our enrollment practices. In changing those enrollment practices, we looked at out of district. We had a lot of students who would come in from out of district, but then when we would go back to the principals, we'd see a long list of sometimes attendance, sometimes discipline, but they're coming to the district, but they're not abiding by the rules that they agreed to when they got here. When we put the tight stipulation on it needs to be in this window, it needs to be from this time. If we're not going to invite people back, we're going to let them know ahead of time. That equated in a lot of people not coming back to the point of about
152.
152, almost 160. So that's a contributing factor.
They weren't helping our ADA.
Well, I wouldn't say that they weren't helping our ADA. Some of the kids showed up every day in the front row. They just clowned I'm sorry. They just didn't act on their best behavior while they were there. So I get the decrease, but in terms of students coming to school, we got a lot of pushback when it was cold. And we didn't shut down. A lot of people are just opting to, I'm going to make sure, exactly. If I don't want my student to go today, they're not going to go. So we're seeing our ADA decrease. I think this was a modest expectation. I think it may be lower than that. So
And we're going to be below 89%.
I'm just.
Everybody who's here is pretty much a paid person now, for the most part. There's no unpaid people to account for. Because I'm just, I am.
Well, we were
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just-
85% in 22-23. We
But
projected
that was, no,
89.
that was all messed up because you're pre-Kers. They didn't.
Again, we were 85%. The ADA is ADA, and we were at,
But a lot of those people didn't count toward our ADA because they don't get funded by the state. So every pre-K that was ineligible. So our ADA was
I can tell you, if I can just share this, as many budget stuff as I've done, our CFO or administration always lowball that percentage. It gives us sort of a safety net in terms of where we are. It gives us a good framework to budget from. Naturally, we want higher ADA, and that's the objective, and more support will come in. But for the sake of a budget, always give yourself some wiggle room, and I think that might be what we're seeing here too. They're just trying to, administration that is, and I can't speak on your behalf, but just based on previous administrations, that's always been the objective.
yes, sir.
Would you say so?
I definitely. It's always under promise, over deliver.
Sure.
And that's been the way that budgets kind of work, not just in educational systems, but in municipalities.
Well, and just to play on what Ms. Ryan had mentioned, if we're seeing declining enrollment, that's a whole different issue, right? Now, we're budgeting here, but if we're seeing trends of declining enrollment, we need to take a look about that strategically and find out what's happening so that we can find out what's happening, what's causing the decrease in enrollment. So those are other discussions, other times, but just a thought process on that.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I can't wait for the program review, because, I mean,
Yeah.
if we're putting a lot of money into, there's students running around all over the states and new computer software and all that, and if it is having zero effect, and we're actually having less kids show up, then yeah. I think that'll be interesting ROI to look at when we talk to that
Absolutely.
program review.
Ms. Eden?
Excuse me, just so I can make sure that I understand, wasn't one of the things that we talked about was when we went to the half-day for the pre-K 3, we had a large decrease in the number of students because of that?
We changed the requirement for being able to attend our pre-Ks. Before, it was pre-K for all, and you didn't have to qualify. Not qualifying, meaning that we didn't receive any compensation for
Right.
you being here, but we were still paying for the teacher to teach that class. When we looked at all of those students, the actual number was, do you have that on hand, Dr. Goss? Is 1,100, or what was it?
We had approximately 1,200 students between pre-K 3 and pre-K 4 that did not qualify for services that reduced our total numbers district-wide. So about 1,200 of the students that you're seeing missing here are from those two programs, from pre-K 3 and pre-K 4.
But also, didn't we go to the half a day for the pre-K 3?
We did go to the half a day for the pre-K 3, and it's only for those students that qualified. So we had, like I said, we had 1,200 students total between grades pre-K 3 and 4 that were not eligible or chose not to come back this year.
Because my question is this, how does that affect our average daily attendance? Because
So
we get a credit, a full day credit for them, even though they're here for half a day?
So for your pre-K 3 kids, you're getting the allotment and you're getting the funding for the half-day pre-K program for each one of those students. The ones that left us in the pre-K 3 and the pre-K 4 program that we did not accept this year, they were not eligible, so we were not being paid anything for those students. We
And
were
we
just
weren't
paying
getting
them.
any credit for them?
No, and all of the students we have
No
now,
money
we
at all.
receive credit for.
Oh,
But we
wow.
had about 36 teachers that we were using to teach those students.
Right, and we were paying
And
for
we were
those
paying
teachers
for
and
that.
not getting any.
Correct, so there's about 1,200 students there that we were not receiving funding for.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, wow, okay, thank you.
And that was part of the reason we made those changes in pre-K.
Any questions, comments before?
Nobody came and told us that.
No, we went through it in
Yes, ma'am, we
detail.
did.
Yeah.
But I understand. It was a while back.
About us not getting money for those teachers?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
You've had a lot of information, I'm sure we've done a lot since then.
Normally, in the first budget session, we share with you if we're in a legislative year, what is going on in the legislation. Well, that's already passed, but, two major things that did come out of the last legislative session was there was absolutely no money designated for teacher pay raises, and there was no increase in the basic allotment. So we just wanted to bring that. We're not in the legislative year right now, but it's something for us to consider as we bring to the board some additional considerations when we're talking about the compensation plan. Board members, as you know, we are currently conducting 3 audits. One through Moss Adams, and we expect to receive their recommendations at the end of February. And that's a staffing audit. Then we are conducting another one through TASB called a pay system audit, and we expect to receive, they'll be ready to present to you all in April. And then we are conducting a pay grade 500, so 500 series audit with Ms. Sharon Fury, and we expect to share those results with you before spring break.
Is this where you're going to talk about the $100,000 versus the $40,000 on the houses, the tax?
It's right here.
Part of the legislative?
No, but if you go ahead, please.
So when we budgeted last year, we budgeted based on there being an exemption of.
Is your mic on?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you don't.
I keep turning, I didn't want to,
Okay.
Last year when we budgeted, we did that based on an exemption of $40,000. During the legislature, they changed it to an exemption on $100,000, which will now be a decrease in the amount of money that we see as well. Am I speaking correctly?
You are, there's also some offset because the way it's supposed to work in theory anyway, if you collect less locally, then the states can make that up. It's not a perfect one-for-one, so we're still kind of evaluating the impact of that change based on that election.
So
So we're gonna get less money from the state?
we may.
From local collections because of the higher homestead exemption.
Was that 100K exemption?
It's supposed to.
Maybe.
In theory,
Yeah.
yeah. we're-
You want to bet?
I'm not confident.
Look at them.
Understand, there are people much more broke than us, so there's only so much the state can do because there are other districts who literally won't be able to pay their payroll.
Dr. Fields and Ms. Davis, when will we have some idea of what that difference
We get
looks like?
unfunded mandates all the time, Ms. Ryan.
Our
All the
second
time.
budget
Go
workshop,
ahead.
sir.
Our
Second-
second budget workshop will be?
Our second budget workshop,
And again, my
will
question
be
was,
on
when will we
April
have a
4th.
better sense? You said by our next one?
April 4th is our budget workshop number 2.
Okay.
So you should have that information.
Yes.
And then, so we talked about those 3 audits. Those are going to be recommendations for the board to consider as we're talking about our compensation plan for next year. We're going to be conducting our program review that we just scheduled right before this meeting started. Something to consider are the staff incentives. We just talked about those staff incentives that dig into the fund balance. We no longer have ESSER to pay half of those staff incentives, so we need to restructure those, or we would hope that we restructure those for next year. Other things to consider is we pay our high-quality instructional materials from our IMA funds, Instructional Materials Allotment Fund, but we've been talking a lot about considering that district-wide, so some of that might be something to consider for, from our general fund. And then our replacement devices, we did move to a one-to-one when we started with our COVID, and so that's something to keep in mind. So as we're thinking about compensation, these are some of the hard decisions that our board will have to be making. In addition, if you go to the next page, some additional budget challenges and considerations to consider. Currently, TEA pays for the Texas College Bridge program. They've already shared with us that they will not be paying that for the districts next year. It's a small amount, but every amount counts when we're talking about our budget. Then we've already talked about our ESSER 3, how we're currently using to about the tune of $7 million. We're supplanting some of those salaries. So consideration as to what we're going to do with those additional positions that came from ESSER that we've added to our fund. And some of those major positions from ESSER are your academic enrichment teachers, which are our GT teachers. They're not, and you are correct. But I use that term because when I say academic enrichment teachers, a lot of people don't understand. So just a quick thing.
I'm
Yes.
just saying, they are not GT teachers.
Correct. So may I address that?
Sure.
So I'm using the word GT for most people to understand, but if you remember 3 years ago, we expanded that program to include more teachers, and we termed them academic enrichment teachers. And what that means is we are using our academic enrichment teachers to teach GT level curriculum to all of our students. We wanted to be able to provide enrichment opportunities for all students, not just necessarily those students who qualified. And it was also a way to help identify and to try to increase those students who are usually underrepresented within a gifted and talented program. So not only do they teach our GT students, they also teach all students through an academic enrichment curriculum. And so we have our librarians as well as part of that ESSER. We have our pre-K staff, both pre-K teachers and pre-K aides. And
Can I go back to that GT point? Can you speak to the middle school GT honors program that we were talking about earlier now, please?
So when the kids transition to middle school and high school, what the GT program is that's at the elementary level is not the same. And so at the elementary level, you would have a pullout, you would have rotations and whatnot. The GT designation does not change on the student itself. How we service them changes based on what level that they are in. And so one of the things that we had in Judson ISD was we called it the TAG program, and that was a locally grown program. We named it that in Judson ISD. The state calls it GT, gifted and talented. And so when we would have our students in those classes that were labeled TAG and it had a different designation number behind the PEIMS number, then what ended up happening when that student transferred to another district, and because they took Algebra 1 or biology in middle school, and they would try to get those credits on the transcript, our transcript credits and course numbers look very different from the districts that were around us because we were running it under the TAG name. So what we have decided to do is call it like the state calls it, GT, gifted and talented. And we're combining those just like our neighboring districts. They're combined in an honors class. And so it's almost like it's stacked together so that the student is in there with other students and also still getting their GT bump that we call in their GPA, but also being able to service them in an honors setting that's getting them ready to go into AP, dual credit, any other class that they want to take that is what we consider accelerated curriculum. And so the two ways we do it here in Judson is that we have accelerated curriculum, which is what we see in our math and science block, where kids are taking 2 grade levels in a year's time. They'll do 6 and 7, or they'll do a combination of 6th, 7th, and 8th in science. And then in our social studies and English classes, we do it through enrichment. And so we try to bring in project-based learning and some of these other types of strategies in teaching them. So at the end of the day, when you look at College Board and you look at where we're trying to service our kids, what they really want to see is diversity in our numbers of kids that are going into these honors classes, diversity in our numbers, and equity, equal access to those type of programs. And so what we have done in Judson, and we're always constantly looking for ways to increase the diversity in these classes, to open up ways for students to have access to what we call more rigorous content so they can graduate with college credit. They can graduate with the learning that they're going to need to take to their high school, take not only to high school, but also take to college. And so one of the things that we were doing is looking at that and making sure that we have a high mobility rate in this district. We're on about 20-something%. And so when kids leave us, we want to make sure that we're not putting roadblocks in the way of their transcripts, how they're getting their points for their GPA and whatnot. And so we're not saying we're no longer, I know I heard that rumor today, we're no longer offering GT at the secondary level. That is not true at all. We are still offering it. Kids are still being designated as GT, gifted and talented students. What we're trying to do is stop the ambiguous language that we had in the district by calling it TAG, because that's something that is not recognized by the state. And so we wanted to make sure we did that, to make sure that we were opening access, and also that's the direction that the state is going. If you've been following along this year, now going into next school year, any 5th grader that scores in the top 40% on STAR is going to be recommended to go into accelerated learning, which means that they will take 6th and 7th grade and half of 7th grade in 6th grade, 7th and half of 7th grade and all of 8th grade in 7th grade, and take Algebra 1 as an 8th grader. The state is pushing us in that direction, and I think that biology is right around the corner, that we're getting ready to do it. Biology, they started with algebra, but I believe that we're going to start making that designation in order to open more access for students.
Yes, feel free.
Yeah, sorry, this was based off the question I asked today because this is a pretty huge program change. And so just so everybody's clear, the TAG or GT, really, the words don't matter. Those kids were brought into a separate classroom with a math teacher and taught using pedagogy with a GT teacher, taught in a certain way. It was 100% differentiating, not differentiating within a classroom, which we all try to do, but let's be real, that doesn't happen a lot. You're just teaching the curriculum like good people. So these kids in their math and their science class were cohorted together with other GT kids, because GT kids' brains don't work like everybody else's brains. That's the beauty of GT, is they just, they process things in different ways and they're very unique personalities. So was one of the amazing flagship things that we had in Judson. It was what was keeping GT families in Judson and not going to BASIS and not going to SST, who have far superior science and math programs to Judson and higher test scores. It was keeping GT families here. And it was all the way through last year. It's in the course catalog for this year. So to hear that our kids in elementary are going to go from getting 3.5 hours of pullout every week to now literally no services in middle school. Because differentiating in a classroom with everybody else who's in, the top 50%, I've watched a number of these kids go through our school system. I know the valedictorian of Veterans Memorial. Some of these kids have been sitting together in the same classes for 9 years now. Wait, 4 plus 3, 7 years now. And those same kids are sitting in AP Economics with Miss Keen Dawes right now that sat together in 6th grade at Kitty Hawk in that TAG GT math class and that TAG GT science class. So to pull all services essentially away and to say differentiation is the only thing we're gonna now do for our middle schoolers, that's a pretty big decision for this district to make. Because it was only costing us 1 FTE at the worst to have those kids in differentiated instruction on their own. So we can discuss more. I'm gonna put this on the agenda for the February board meeting because I don't think this is a program we should cancel.
You mean 1
without
FTE at each campus, correct?
Correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Because they only teach one 6th grade teacher teaches 1 class period of math. We don't have generally more than 24 TAG kids at in one grade at one campus. So their first period is their TAG kids and the rest of their periods. And either way, it's not even necessarily an FTE because that teacher was either gonna teach a group of honors kids or they were gonna teach 24 TAG kids. So really it's almost a cost to the district to do it and it's an opportunity. So I just don't think we should let this one just go, because all the course sheets went home now. So that's why my phone started blowing up and I started blowing up people's phones, because all of a sudden it looks different than every other year.
I don't want to hijack, especially when
So
we're
we can
coming
talk
up on
about it more,
8:30.
because I'm gonna put it on
We
the
can,
agenda.
if you put it on the
Yeah,
agenda, we
because I
can
think
bring in
there's
Mr.
parents that wanna
Holmes.
come speak and just for sure know that their voices have been heard and.
I understand completely.
Well, and I'll just add, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Eaton, put your mic on.
I'm confused because that's not what I just heard her say.
Well,
She said we were going to service
Incorrect about how we
basic.
do it?
Well, here's the deal. What we're saying is that typically those classes at the middle school were stacked.
Right.
Sometimes they were separate, but what we found was the state said, and correct me if I'm wrong, the state said that they weren't going to have a GT separate program. It was called an honors program at the middle school level, correct? Isn't that what Mr. Holmes
They
expressed?
don't use necessarily the term GT, but the gifted and talented services of an identified student will continue through middle school and high
Right.
school.
Under this particular program
Right.
of
Whether we
the,
call it GT or whether we call
call
it
it
honors.
honors.
We still have to
So they'll
service
still
our
get
students.
The
service.
services are still available,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
They're in the same class as an honors kid who's not GT.
Well,
That's what she just said.
what I'd like to do is obviously
can
not,
talk about it.
not debate that part here. We're talking budget.
Right.
So if Ms. Ryan submits this as an agenda item, that's fine. You guys can get your documentation for all of that, and we'll discuss it at our next board meeting. But I will just piggyback on the concern. We recognize that there are some strategies in middle school. We realize that there's issues in HR. We know there are some areas that we need to really start helping administration and board focus on. Not to say that we've done a lot of good things in both of those areas, but we recognize that there's some challenges there still. So we just don't live in a perfect world, right? There's always going to be something. But I like what we have done, and of course, let's put stuff on the agenda to discuss and clarify and move forward with. So that being said, I know that we're near the end. The only thing that I didn't,
You can ask.
is a quick one?
Wait, it's more of a, can you get back to me on?
Sure. We'll
Yeah,
put it on record.
if we can please pick some number on ESSER, because I pulled all the audits today, and we don't have that much money left to even spend on ESSER positions. We've spent over 50 million of our 63. We only had 12 even left to spend, and we should spent 7 of that on stipends. And we spent money on SEL contracts and bandy jock. I went through everything we approved as a board. We bought the ADs during this fiscal year with ESSER money. So I'm tracking that we've spent like over 9 million of that 12 million already. So I can't figure out how we have 7 million in ESSER staff to go back. So if we can just get a really, we know where we ended 23, right? We got that done. So we just need to track down how much we had left and then where we've spent that this year. I think that'll help us move forward once we see exactly where all of this year's money kind of got laid out type thing. So
When you said that you
feel like
say
it's
we
that
don't have the money, are you saying that we don't have it in their salaries, or?
no, I'm saying you only had 12 million left when you started this year in ESSER money.
Again, we've got encumbered funds for particular areas that we had to spend the money. I'll let you answer.
Yeah, and this is,
I was
this is
gonna
not
say,
something you have to answer
yeah,
right now. You can-
just
we'll-
get that.
it's just a-
But
why
I
don't
mean,
you
you
vote on the record?
put it out there that
Well, I
there's an
like
amount of money that we
clarity.
don't have enough
Well,
money to.
and you've said that earlier, so provide the information. We'll obviously discuss it in the next budget meeting. We don't have to sit back and forth, go back, provide the information for the board, and that should be fine.
We need that for the for our meeting on the 15th, because I don't want to give employees the impression that we don't have enough money to pay their salaries. That's
And
kind
that's
of
what we
crazy.
just put out there. So I'm asking,
Okay,
can we
so
respond?
can we clarify that on the 15th?
I understand the sensitivity to that. Please respond.
Yes, we have encumbered all of our monies for ESSER 3. We provided to the board, I believe not so long ago in some Friday notes, what it is that we expect to use that money in ESSER 3. We did reclass some of the ESSER 3 expenses to ESSER 2 as well, to make sure that we were able to free up some money in ESSER 3 to pay those positions that we have added. So Jody, is there anything else that you would like to add regarding what we have in ESSER 3? But to be clear, we have it encumbered. We have shown that, and I know it was an additional request that came by. We will also be providing that additional information to the board.
Well, and we'll do it there for the sake of us being on time. The only other thing I wanted to say is that I still would like to hear from the board, not now, and we'll just think about this, what some of the aspirations are for this budget cycle. It's important you get board input on what some of the priorities are. Ms. Ryan has already alluded to some, but we have the ability to put things on the agenda for discussion to help with your decision on it. But just think about that. So there being no further business, I'd like to adjourn. We're adjourned. Yes.